England, 1811. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Thornfield Hall, casting long shadows across the breakfast room where Seraphina sat alone. Again. The delicate porcelain cup trembled slightly in her hands as she listened to the distant sound of her husband's boots echoing through the marble corridors, growing fainter with each step until silence reclaimed the vast estate. 3 years of marriage, and she could count on one hand the mornings Edward Blackwell, Duke of Worthington, had broken his fast beside her. She was 23 now, no longer the hopeful bride of 20 who had arrived at these imposing gates with dreams of companionship woven from the romantic novels hidden in her trousseau. Her mother had prepared her well for the duties of a duchess, how to manage an estate, host distinguished gatherings, maintain dignity in all circumstances, yet no one had prepared her for the peculiar ache of sharing a home with a man who treated her as little more than an elegant fixture, necessary but unremarkable. The toast on her plate had gone cold, untouched. Seraphina stared at it, remembering how in those first weeks of marriage she had asked the cook to prepare Edward's breakfast exactly as he preferred: eggs coddled just so, toast with orange marmalade from the estate's own orangery, coffee strong and black. She had risen early each morning, dressed carefully, and waited in this very room hoping he would join her. Sometimes he did, for perhaps 10 minutes, eating in silence while reading correspondence, acknowledging her presence with a brief nod before disappearing into his study or departing for London or one of his other properties. More often he did not appear at all. The first time he had failed to come to breakfast, she had worried something was amiss. She had sent a footman to inquire, only to learn that His Grace had departed for his morning ride at dawn and would take a tray in his study upon his return. The second time, she had said nothing, merely picked at her own meal in the echoing silence of the breakfast room. By the 10th time she had stopped expecting him altogether, yet still she came each morning, maintaining the ritual, as if through sheer force of will she might make real the marriage she had imagined. Edward was not cruel. That might have been easier to bear, for cruelty could be confronted, discussed, perhaps even resolved. Instead, he was absent. At 35, the Duke had perfected the art of presence without connection. He attended to his parliamentary duties with diligence, managed his extensive properties with precision, and acknowledged his wife with the same distant courtesy he might extend to a respected housekeeper. During their infrequent encounters, his grey eyes would pass over her as if seeing through rather than to her, his mind already departed for matters of greater consequence. Seraphina set down her cup with a soft click that seemed to echo through the cavernous room. The breakfast room at Thornfield Hall could have accommodated 20 guests with ease. The mahogany table stretched for what seemed like miles, its surface polished to such a shine that she could see her reflection in it. A young woman with auburn hair arranged in fashionable curls, a morning dress of sprigged muslin that had cost more than her father's annual income, and eyes that held a weariness no 23-year-old should possess. She had been the daughter of a country gentleman of modest means, her family respectable but hardly wealthy. When the Duke of Worthington had paid attention to her during her first London season, it had seemed like a fairy tale. He had been handsome, distinguished, wealthy beyond measure, and seemingly interested in her conversation during the few occasions they had spoken at various balls and assemblies. Her mother had nearly fainted with joy when he had requested permission to court her. Her father, more pragmatic, had seemed troubled, but ultimately acquiesced to what was considered a brilliant match. The courtship had been brief and formal. Henry had called upon her family precisely 3 times, spoken with her father twice about settlements and expectations, and proposed during a carefully chaperoned walk in Hyde Park. His proposal had been proper and emotionless, a business arrangement dressed in the language of matrimony. "Miss Hartley," he had said, not even using her Christian name, "I find myself in need of a wife to manage my household and eventually provide an heir. Your character appears sound, your breeding acceptable, and your demeanor suitably modest. I believe we should suit well enough. Will you do me the honor of accepting my hand in marriage?" She should have recognized the warning in those words. Suit well enough. Not love, not even affection, merely suitability. But she had been 20 years old and sheltered, raised on novels where cold dukes were transformed by the love of gentle heroines, and she had convinced herself that affection would grow after marriage. Her mother had assured her that many marriages began as arrangements and blossomed into genuine partnerships. "You must be patient, dearest," her mother had counseled. "Men of his station are not raised to express sentiment freely. Your steadiness and devotion will win his heart in time." 3 years later, Evangeline understood that her mother had been either naive or deliberately misleading. Some hearts were not available to be won. Some men built walls so high and thick that no amount of devotion could scale them. The wedding had been grand, attended by half the nobility of England, She had worn a gown of ivory silk that had taken 6 seamstresses 3 months to complete. Henry had stood beside her at the altar in his formal attire, speaking his vows in a clear, emotionless voice that might have been reciting a parliamentary speech. When he had kissed her at the conclusion of the ceremony, his lips had barely brushed hers, cool and impersonal. The wedding breakfast had been a blur of faces and well-wishes from people she did not know, all congratulating her on her brilliant match. Lady Thornbury, an older woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, had taken her aside at one point. "You have done well for yourself, Gell," she had said, not unkindly. "Worthington is a cold fish, always has been, but he is honourable and wealthy. Keep your expectations modest, produce an heir or two and occupy yourself with charitable works. You will have a comfortable life, which is more than most can claim." At the time, Evangeline had been offended by the woman's cynicism. Now she recognized it as kindness, an attempt to prepare her for reality rather than leave her floundering in disappointed expectations. The journey to Ashmore Hall after the wedding had taken most of a day. Henry had ridden ahead on horseback while she followed in the ducal carriage, accompanied only by her new lady's maid, a stolid woman named Martha, who had been in service at Ashmore Hall for 20 years. Martha had attempted conversation initially, pointing out landmarks and offering tidbits about the estate and its history, but Evangeline had been too overwhelmed to absorb much beyond the growing certainty that she was travelling toward a life utterly foreign to everything she had known. Ashmore Hall had appeared on the horizon like something from a Gothic novel, a massive stone edifice with dozens of windows that caught the dying light of the sun, formal gardens stretching in geometric precision around the structure, and an avenue of ancient oaks leading to the main entrance. It was beautiful and imposing and utterly terrifying in its grandeur. Henry had been waiting at the entrance when her carriage arrived, flanked by what seemed like an army of servants, all lined up to greet their new mistress. He had handed her down from the carriage with perfunctory courtesy and led her through a bewildering introduction to the staff: Mrs. Hendricks, the housekeeper, Mr. Pembers, the butler, various footmen and maids, whose names she could not possibly remember, the cook, the head gardener, the steward who managed the estate. "Mrs. Hendricks will show you to your chambers and familiarize you with the household," Henry had said once the introductions were complete. "I trust you will find everything to your satisfaction. Dinner is served at 8. I shall see you then." And he had simply walked away, leaving her standing in the grand entrance hall with Mrs. Hendricks, feeling like a child abandoned at a strange house. Her chambers had proven to be a suite of rooms more luxurious than anything she had ever inhabited. A bedroom, with a canopied bed large enough to sleep 4, a dressing room lined with empty wardrobes waiting for her trousseau, a sitting room with furniture upholstered in pale blue silk, and windows overlooking the gardens. It was beautiful and perfectly appointed and utterly impersonal, like a very expensive hotel room. Mrs. Hendricks had shown her through the rooms with professional pride, pointing out the bell pulls for summoning servants, the modern conveniences of the washing stand, the quality of the linens. "His Grace wanted everything to be perfect for your Grace's arrival," the housekeeper had said. "He commissioned the redecoration himself 3 months ago." Evangeline had wanted to ask if Henry had chosen the colours himself, if he had thought about what she might like, but she had already suspected the answer. He had likely told the decorator to create suitable chambers for a duchess and left all decisions to professionals. The rooms were lovely but contained nothing personal, nothing that suggested they had been prepared for her specifically, rather than for whatever woman might have agreed to become the Duchess of Worthington. That first dinner had set the pattern for all that followed. Evangeline had dressed carefully in one of her new gowns, spending nearly an hour with Martha fussing over her hair and appearance. She had descended to the dining room promptly at 8, to find Henry already seated at the head of the absurdly long table, reading some document while he waited. He had stood when she entered, held her chair for her. She was seated to his right, close enough to converse, but far enough that intimacy was impossible, and then returned to his papers, while footmen served course after course of elaborate food. She had attempted conversation several times. "The estate is very beautiful. I should like to explore the gardens tomorrow if the weather holds." "Indeed. Mrs. Hendricks can arrange for a tour." "I noticed there is a pianoforte in the music room. Do you enjoy music, Your Grace?" "I have little time for such pursuits. Perhaps we might ride together some day. I enjoy riding, though I confess I am not an accomplished horsewoman." "I ride very early, before most are awake. You need not feel obligated to join me." Each overture had been met with polite but definitive discouragement. By the time the final course was cleared, Evangeline had fallen silent, and Henry had seemed relieved. When the meal concluded, he had stood, bowed slightly, and informed her that he had work to attend to in his study. She had been left to find her own way back to her chambers. The nights were worst. Evangeline had been educated about marital duties by her mother in the vaguest terms possible. References to wifely obligations and submission to one's husband, assurances that any discomfort would be brief and infrequent, and exhortations to think of England and the importance of heirs. She had been terrified on her wedding night, waiting in her bedchamber in the nightgown that was part of her trousseau, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Henry had knocked precisely at midnight and entered without waiting for her response. He had still been dressed, though he had removed his jacket and cravat. He had stood awkwardly near the door for a moment, seeming as uncomfortable as she felt. "I shall endeavour to make this as quick as possible," he had said, which was perhaps the least romantic statement ever uttered in a marriage bed. "I am told it may be uncomfortable the first time. I apologize in advance for any distress." What followed had been exactly as uncomfortable as promised and utterly devoid of any tenderness or passion. Henry had approached the act as if it were another duty to be discharged, like signing documents or meeting with his steward. He had been neither rough nor gentle, merely efficient. When it was over, he had withdrawn immediately, straightened his clothing, and departed with a brief, "Good night, madam." Evangeline had lain in the darkness afterward, tears sliding down her temples into her hair, wondering if this was truly all there was to marital intimacy. Surely the novels had exaggerated the romance of such encounters, but surely there should be something more than what she had just experienced. The pattern had repeated itself with dispiriting regularity for the first months of their marriage. Henry would appear in her chambers 2 or 3 times each week, perform his duty with mechanical precision, and leave. He never spent the night, never lingered, never kissed her except for one brief, perfunctory touch of lips at the start of each encounter. He rarely even looked directly at her face during the act, his gaze fixed somewhere past her shoulder, as if he were thinking of something else entirely. After the first 6 months, when no pregnancy had occurred, the visits became less frequent. After a year, they had dwindled to perhaps once a month. After 18 months, they ceased altogether, without explanation or discussion. Henry simply stopped coming to her chambers, and Evangeline was left in her lonely bed, wondering if she had somehow failed in her duties, if her inability to conceive immediately had made her irrelevant to him, if she had done something wrong that she could not even identify. She had tried in those early months to bridge the distance between them. She had studied the household accounts and begun making suggestions to Mrs. Hendricks about economies that could be achieved without sacrificing comfort. She had taken an interest in the estate gardens, working alongside the head gardener to plan new plantings and restore neglected areas. She had attempted to engage Henry in conversation about these efforts, hoping to demonstrate her capability and worth. "I have been reviewing the household expenditures with Mrs. Hendricks," she had ventured one evening at dinner during their 3rd month of marriage. "I believe we could reduce costs by purchasing certain staples directly from local suppliers, rather than through intermediaries in London." "If you and Mrs. Hendricks believe it wise, proceed as you see fit," Henry had replied without looking up from his plate. "Such matters are properly within your domain. I thought perhaps you might wish to review my proposals first." "That is unnecessary. I trust Mrs. Hendricks's judgment, and as you are now mistress of the household, these decisions are yours to make." It should have been empowering. He was granting her authority over the domestic sphere, as was proper for a wife, but his complete disinterest in even discussing her ideas had made clear that he truly did not care what she did, as long as it did not require his attention or involvement. She had tried to interest him in her musical abilities. The music room at Ashmore Hall contained a magnificent pianoforte, clearly expensive and well-maintained, though it seemed rarely used. Evangeline had always found solace in music, and she began spending several hours each day at the instrument, working through pieces she had learned before her marriage and teaching herself new compositions. One evening, she had gathered her courage and asked if Henry might like to hear her play. "I have been practicing a sonata by Mozart that I think came out rather well," she had said. "It would please me to perform it for you." He had glanced up from his newspaper with an expression of mild surprise, as if she had just suggested something peculiar. "I am certain you play admirably, madam. However, I have correspondence to attend to this evening. Perhaps another time." Another time never came, because she never asked again, unwilling to face another polite rejection. The gardens had become her refuge. The grounds at Ashmore Hall were extensive, including formal parterres near the house, a rose garden that had been neglected for years, a kitchen garden that supplied the household, and wilder woodland areas that stretched for acres. Evangeline had begun spending her mornings working in the gardens, particularly in the rose garden, which she had made her special project. She had found old plans in the estate library, showing how the rose garden had looked during Henry's grandfather's time. An elaborate arrangement of beds, organized by color, with varieties chosen for both beauty and fragrance. Over the years of neglect, Many of the original roses had died or become overgrown, the beds choked with weeds, the pathways obscured. With the help of the head gardener, a taciturn man named Willis who seemed surprised but pleased by her interest, Evangeline had begun the slow work of restoration. They had cleared the overgrown beds, tested the soil, and ordered new rose bushes from a nursery renowned for its stock. She had spent hours on her knees in the dirt, much to Martha's dismay, planting and pruning and nurturing the roses back to health. The work was physically demanding and left her exhausted each day, but it gave her something tangible to show for her time. The roses responded to her care, putting out new growth, eventually blooming in profusion. By the second summer of her marriage, the rose garden had become a showplace admired by the few guests who visited Ashmore Hall. Henry had walked through it once, accompanying a parliamentary colleague who had expressed interest in the gardens. Evangeline had been working in one of the beds when they appeared, and she had scrambled to her feet, acutely aware of her dirt-stained hands and the simple day dress she wore for gardening. "Your Grace," Henry's companion had said warmly. "What a magnificent garden. Is this your work?" "I have helped with the restoration, yes," Evangeline had replied, pleased despite herself. "Helped? Willis tells me Her Grace has done the majority of the planning and planting herself," the head gardener had interjected, earning a grateful smile from Evangeline. "How delightful to find a lady willing to actually work in her gardens, rather than merely admire them from a distance," the guest had continued. "You must be very proud, Worthington." Henry had glanced around the garden with the same polite disinterest he showed everything else. "Yes, quite. The roses are very fine. Shall we continue to the stables? I wish to show you that stallion I mentioned." And that had been the extent of his acknowledgement of weeks of hard work and devotion. Evangeline had continued her efforts regardless, finding satisfaction in the beauty she created even if her husband never noticed. The gardens had become her statement to the world, proof that she existed, that she had impact, that she could create something lovely even in the midst of her lonely existence. The household staff had come to respect her, she realized. Mrs. Hendricks had begun consulting her regularly about household matters, and unlike Henry's dismissive delegation, the housekeeper's deference felt like genuine respect for Evangeline's judgment. The servants had responded well to her gentle management style, and she had earned their loyalty by learning their names, inquiring about their families, and ensuring they were treated fairly. When one of the scullery maids had fallen ill with a fever, Evangeline had personally nursed her, sitting up through several nights to ensure the girl received proper care. The maid had recovered fully, and word had spread through the staff that Her Grace had a kind heart. After that, the servants' attitude toward her had warmed considerably, though she suspected they also pitied her, aware as they were of the distance between the Duke and Duchess. But the respect of servants, however gratifying, could not fill the gnawing emptiness at the center of her existence. She had everything material comfort could provide, and nothing that truly mattered. No companionship, no affection, no purpose beyond maintaining a household for a man who barely acknowledged her presence. The turning point had come gradually, so slowly she had not recognized it at first. She had stopped dressing carefully for dinner when it became clear Henry never looked at her anyway. She had stopped attempting conversation when every overture was rebuffed. She had stopped waiting hopefully for his knock on her chamber door in the evenings. She had simply stopped. For weeks, perhaps months, she had existed in a kind of numb acceptance. This was her life, and she would endure it as countless women before her had endured unsatisfying marriages. She would find meaning in her gardens, her music, her management of the household. She would perhaps eventually have children, though even that seemed increasingly unlikely, given Henry's complete abandonment of marital relations. She would grow old in this beautiful prison, and someday she would die, and her headstone would read Evangeline Ashmore, Duchess of Worthington, and no one would know that the woman behind those titles had been desperately, achingly lonely for her entire married life. But then something had shifted. Perhaps it was reading one too many novels where the heroine accepted mistreatment with saintly patience. Perhaps it was receiving a letter from her younger sister Anne, bubbling with excitement about her own upcoming wedding to a country vicar who clearly adored her. Perhaps it was simply that 3 years was long enough to hope for change that would never come. Evangeline had been sitting in the music room one afternoon, her hands idle on the pianoforte keys, when she had suddenly been struck by the absurdity of her situation. Here she sat in a grand estate, wearing expensive clothes, surrounded by beauty and luxury, and she was profoundly miserable. Not because of anything she lacked materially, but because she was living as a ghost in her own life. She was 23 years old. She could conceivably live another 40 or 50 years. Could she truly spend the next 4 or 5 decades in this state of suspended animation, waiting for a man who would never see her, never know her, never care? The answer, she had realized with sudden clarity, was no. She could not. She would not. But what were her options? She could not leave her marriage. Divorce was scandalous and nearly impossible to obtain, and even separation would ruin her reputation and likely that of her family. She had no fortune of her own, no means of supporting herself independently. She had been raised for exactly one purpose, to be a wife and mother. She had no training or skills that would allow her to earn her own living. Yet surely there had to be something between her current misery and the impossible dream of divorce. Some middle ground where she could preserve her dignity while acknowledging the reality of her situation. These thoughts had been percolating in her mind for weeks when Henry had returned from his latest trip to London. He had been away for more than 2 weeks this time, attending Parliament and attending to business matters. Evangeline had barely noticed his absence, which itself was telling. She was so accustomed to him being unavailable that his physical absence made little difference. He had arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, and she had been informed of his return by a footman. She had not gone to greet him, knowing from experience that he preferred to go directly to his study and would not welcome the interruption. Instead, she had continued with her afternoon routine, spending time in the rose garden deadheading spent blooms and checking for any sign of disease or pest damage. She had learned at dinner that evening that he was planning to depart again the next morning for one of his other properties, Thornfield Manor in Kent, where some matter required his personal attention. He had mentioned this casually between the fish course and the meat course, as if commenting on the weather. Something inside Evangeline had snapped at that moment, not loudly or dramatically, but with quiet finality. She had set down her fork with careful precision and looked directly at her husband, really looked at him for perhaps the first time in months. "Might I accompany you to Kent?" she had asked, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. Henry had glanced up from his plate, clearly surprised by the question. "To Thornfield? Whatever for?" "I have never seen the property. I thought it might be pleasant to become acquainted with all of your estates. It is not a particularly interesting journey, and I shall be occupied with business matters the entire time. You would find it very dull. Nevertheless, I should like to come." She had kept her voice level, reasonable. "I am your wife. Surely it is appropriate for me to visit your properties. Perhaps at another time. This visit is purely business and will not afford any opportunity for leisure. Then perhaps I might accompany you to London next time you go," she had persisted, feeling as if she were clinging to a cliff edge by her fingernails. "I have not been to town in some months, and there are matters requiring my attention, fabric for new curtains for the drawing room, and I should like to visit a particular nursery about some roses for next spring." He had set down his wineglass with a soft clink that somehow sounded final. "The season has ended, madam. There would be little to occupy you." "I do not require the season to occupy me. I have practical matters to attend to, as I mentioned. Such things can be managed through correspondents and agents. It is not necessary for you to travel to London." "It may not be necessary, but I wish to go." She had heard the edge creeping into her voice, but could not seem to control it. "Surely my wishes have some bearing on the matter." Henry had given her a look of mild puzzlement, as if she were a usually well-behaved dog that had suddenly barked unexpectedly. "Your wishes are always taken into consideration. However, in this instance, it is simply not convenient. Perhaps in the spring, when the season opens again, we might go to London together if you desire it. Perhaps. If you desire." Always the vague future promises that would never materialize. "Not convenient," Evangeline had repeated, the words tasting bitter. "Tell me, husband, when has my presence ever been convenient to you? When has anything about me penetrated that fortress of indifference you have constructed around yourself?" The words had emerged more forcefully than she had intended, shocking her nearly as much as they clearly shocked Henry. A footman standing near the sideboard had gone very still, and she had been aware that this conversation was being conducted in front of servants, which was improper. She had not cared. Henry had straightened in his chair, his expression shifting from surprise to something harder. "Evangeline, you are overwrought." "I am overwrought." She had felt 3 years of suppressed frustration boiling up, unstoppable now that it had begun. "I am lonely. I have been lonely since the day I became your Duchess, living in this magnificent mausoleum, speaking to no one but servants, mattering to no one at all." "That is hardly fair." "Is it not? When was the last time you spoke to me about anything of substance? When did you last inquire about my day, my interests, my thoughts? When did you last look at me, truly look at me, rather than through me, as if I were invisible?" Henry had stood, his napkin falling unheeded to the floor. "I fail to see what has brought on this display. You have everything a woman could desire: position, security, freedom to pursue your interests without interference. Everything but a husband who acknowledges I exist beyond my title and duties. The words had torn from her throat. I am not asking for grand romantic gestures, Henry. I am merely asking to be seen, to be noticed, to matter to you in some way, however small. You do matter. How do I matter to you? Can you name a single thing about me beyond the fact that I manage your household competently? Do you know my favorite color? My favorite flower? What music I prefer? What books I read? Anything at all about who I am as a person rather than as the woman who happens to bear your name? The silence that followed had been deafening. Henry had stood there, his jaw working as if searching for words, and Evangeline had seen in his face that he could not answer her questions. He did not know those things because he had never asked, never cared to know. What would you have me do? He had finally asked, and there had been something in his voice, not quite defensiveness but genuine confusion, as if she had just accused him of something incomprehensible. I have provided for you generously. I do not interfere with your pursuits or activities. I have given you respect and autonomy. What more can you possibly require? A husband, she had said simply, not a landlord or a banker or a distant benefactor. A husband, a partner, someone who sits beside me at breakfast sometimes because he wishes to spend time with me. Someone who notices when I have worked hard on something and offers a word of praise or encouragement. Someone who speaks to me as if I were a person of interest rather than a necessary inconvenience. Henry had shaken his head slowly, and she had seen in his expression something that looked almost like pity. You are describing a romantic fantasy, Evangeline. We are not characters in one of your novels. Our marriage is an arrangement, an entirely proper and reasonable arrangement that serves practical purposes. If you expected more than that, the fault lies in your unrealistic expectations, not in any failure on my part to fulfill my obligations. Those words, the dismissal of her needs as unrealistic expectations, the reduction of their marriage to an arrangement, the complete absence of any recognition that perhaps, just perhaps, he bore some responsibility for her unhappiness, had crystallized something inside her. You are right, she had said quietly, feeling suddenly calm as if a great weight had lifted from her shoulders. I did have unrealistic expectations. I expected that my husband might eventually come to care for me, or at least to see me as a human being rather than a function to be performed. That was foolish of me. Evangeline, I am going to my parents' estate in Derbyshire, she had announced, the decision forming even as she spoke the words. I find I am not well, and the country air may restore me. I shall send word when I am recovered. Henry's expression had shifted to something like alarm. You are unwell? Should I send for a physician? That will not be necessary. I simply need distance, time away from here. For how long? I do not know. And truly she had not. A week? A month? Forever? She had not allowed herself to think that far ahead. But what will people say? Your departure will cause talk. Of course that would be his concern. Not her well-being, but appearances. I shall write to several acquaintances mentioning that I have been feeling poorly and have gone to my family for rest and recuperation. A simple indisposition, nothing alarming. By the time anyone thinks to gossip, I shall either have returned or shall have been gone long enough that my absence seems ordinary. Henry had studied her face, and she had seen the moment when he calculated that arguing further would be both futile and unnecessary. If she wished to leave, why should he object? Her presence made little difference to him, one way or another. Very well. I shall have the travelling coach prepared for you. When do you wish to depart? Tomorrow morning. She had wanted to leave that instant, but propriety and practicality required some preparation. As you wish. He had bowed slightly, formally. I hope the visit with your family proves restorative. And that had been that. No plea for her to stay, no expression of concern beyond the superficial, no attempt to discuss what had just transpired between them. He had simply accepted her departure as he accepted everything else, with cool, distant courtesy. Evangeline had risen from the table, aware that she was abandoning her meal half-eaten, aware that the servants would gossip, aware that everything about this situation was irregular. She had not cared. She had walked from the dining room with her head high, climbed the stairs to her chambers, and rung for Martha. We are going to Derbyshire, she had announced. Tomorrow morning. Please begin packing. Martha, who had served her long enough to read her moods, had taken one look at her face and asked no questions. Yes, Your Grace. Shall I pack for an extended stay? Yes. How extended, Evangeline had not known, but better to be prepared. That night, alone in her bed for what she had known might be the last time in these particular chambers, Evangeline had lain awake staring at the canopy overhead. She had felt no regret for the confrontation with Henry, though she perhaps should have. Ladies did not raise their voices or challenge their husbands. Ladies certainly did not abandon their homes and duties because they were lonely. But she had spent 3 years being a proper lady. And where had it gotten her? Nowhere. She was no closer to having a real marriage than she had been on her wedding day. If anything, the distance between her and Henry had only widened as they each retreated further into their separate existences. Perhaps her departure would shock him into some recognition of what he had lost. Or perhaps more likely, he would simply continue his life exactly as before, barely noting her absence, except when some household matter required the mistress's attention. Either way, she needed to leave. She needed to go somewhere she was actually wanted, where her presence mattered, where she was more than a title and a function. She needed to remember who Evangeline Hartley had been before she became the invisible Duchess of Worthington. The next morning had dawned grey and drizzling, which had seemed fitting. Evangeline had dressed in travelling clothes, taken one last walk through her gardens. The roses were beginning to fade with the approach of autumn, their blooms growing sparse, and climbed into the travelling coach. Henry had been nowhere to be seen. She had learned from Mrs. Hendricks that he had departed at dawn for his morning ride, and was not expected to return until she would be well on her way. Whether this absence was deliberate or coincidental, she did not know, and tried not to care. As the coach had rolled down the long avenue of oaks, carrying her away from Ashmore Hall, Evangeline had looked back at the great house growing smaller in the distance. She had felt no surge of regret, no desire to ask the coachman to turn around, only a profound sense of relief, as if she had been holding her breath for 3 years and could finally exhale. She was going home, to parents who loved her, to a sister who would listen to her troubles, to a small manor house where she mattered simply because she was their daughter, not because of any title or duty. She was going to a place where she could remember what it felt like to be genuinely seen and valued. What happened after that, she would determine when she was ready. But for now, escape was enough. The journey to Derbyshire took 2 days, with an overnight stop at a respectable coaching inn. Evangeline spent most of the travel time staring out the window at the passing countryside, her mind curiously blank. She had expected to feel anguish or doubt about her decision, but instead she felt only a kind of peaceful numbness. Martha had attempted some conversation initially, comments about the weather, observations about the country they were passing through, but when Evangeline's responses remained monosyllabic, the maid had lapsed into silence. Martha was loyal and discreet. Whatever she thought about this sudden departure, she kept to herself. They arrived at Hartley Manor in the late afternoon of the second day. The house was exactly as Evangeline remembered it, a modest but comfortable country manor, nowhere near the scale of Ashmore Hall, but infinitely warmer. The gardens were slightly wild, the stone facade showed signs of weathering that could not be afforded, but it was home in a way the ducal estate had never been. Her mother had been in the front garden cutting flowers when the coach arrived. At the sight of the ducal crest on the carriage door, Mrs. Hartley had dropped her basket, flowers spilling across the path, and rushed forward with an expression of mingled joy and concern. "Evangeline, my dearest girl, we had no word you were coming." Her mother had embraced her tightly, then pulled back to study her face with worried eyes. "What has happened? Are you well? Is something amiss?" "I am perfectly well, Mamma," Evangeline had assured her, though she felt tears prickling behind her eyes at the genuine warmth of her mother's greeting, such a contrast to Henry's indifferent farewell. "I simply felt the need for a visit home. I hope my arrival is not inconvenient." "Inconvenient? What nonsense! You are always welcome here, you know that." Mrs. Hartley had tucked Evangeline's arm through her own and begun walking toward the house. "Your father will be so pleased. He has been working in his study all day on some tedious correspondence. Anne is here as well. She and Mr. Whitmore have been going over wedding plans. Oh, she will be so delighted to see you." Indeed, her sister Anne had come flying out of the house moments later, her face alight with pleasure. At 19, she was on the cusp of her own marriage, and the contrast between her glowing happiness and Evangeline's own experience was both heartwarming and painful. "Evie! Oh, how wonderful! I have so much to tell you about the wedding preparations." Anne had caught her hands bouncing with excitement. "Mr. Whitmore's mother has been so kind, and we have found the loveliest fabric for my dress, and— But wait, why are you here? Not that I am not thrilled, but we were not expecting you." "I felt in need of country air and family," Evangeline had said, which was true enough. "May a duchess not visit her own family without an inquisition?" Her father had emerged from his study at the commotion, and the joy on his face at seeing her had made Evangeline's throat tight with emotion. Mr. Hartley was a scholarly man, more comfortable with books than social niceties, but he had always doted on his daughters. "My dear child," he had said warmly, kissing her forehead. "What a delightful surprise. Come, you must be exhausted from your journey. Let us get you settled, and then you shall tell us all your news over dinner." The family had swept her into the house, into the familiar warmth and slight chaos of her childhood home. How different it was from Ashmore Hall, where servants glided silently through vast rooms, and every surface gleamed with polish. Here books were stacked haphazardly on tables, a half-finished embroidery project lay abandoned on the sofa, and her mother's painting supplies cluttered one corner of the sitting room. It was imperfect and lived in and wonderful. That evening, gathered around the much smaller but infinitely warmer dining table, Evangeline had tried to present a cheerful facade. She had inquired about Anne's wedding plans, listened to her mother's gossip about local families, and discussed her father's latest historical research project. She had described the gardens at Ashmore Hall and some of the improvements she had made to the household, but her mother had seen through the performance. After dinner, when Anne had gone to the drawing room to practice her pianoforte and her father had returned to his study, Mrs. Hartley had taken Evangeline's hand. "Walk with me in the garden, dearest. The evening is fine, and I think we should speak privately." They had strolled through the modest gardens, so different from the grand parterres of Ashmore, and for a while neither spoke. Finally, her mother had said gently, "You are not happy." It was not a question. Evangeline had felt her careful composure crumble. "No, Mamma, I am not. Tell me." And so she had. Everything had poured out. The loneliness, the isolation, Henry's complete indifference, the mechanical nature of their brief intimacy that had ceased altogether, the emptiness of her grand existence. Her mother had listened without interruption, her face growing increasingly troubled. "I had hoped," Mrs. Hartley had said softly when Evangeline finally fell silent, "that he would come to appreciate you. You are so lovely, so capable, so kind. I had thought any man would be fortunate to have such a wife. He does not see me, Mamma. I am not certain he ever has. I am simply the woman he married because he required a duchess, and now that I have proven unable to quickly produce an heir, I am even less relevant to him. You have not quickened at all in 3 years. We have not shared a bed in more than 18 months. I do not think the fault is mine for failing to conceive. Rather, I think he simply lost interest in the attempt." Her mother had made a soft sound of distress. "Oh, my poor child, this is not what I wished for you when I encouraged the match. He seemed so proper, so respectable. I thought he would be a steady, reliable husband, even if not a romantic one." "He is steady and reliable, I suppose." "Steadily absent and reliably indifferent." They had walked in silence for a few more moments before her mother asked, "What will you do?" "I do not know. I cannot leave him permanently. The scandal would be insupportable, but I cannot bear to return immediately either. May I stay here for a time? I know it is an imposition." "An imposition? Evangeline, this is your home. You may stay as long as you wish, forever if you choose. Your father and I would be delighted to have you." The relief had been overwhelming. "I told Henry I was unwell and needed country air. If anyone inquires, that must be the story. I do not wish to cause gossip that might harm his reputation or reflect poorly on our family. You protect him even now, when he has given you so little consideration." Her mother had shaken her head. "You are too good, dearest, but yes, we shall say you are recuperating from some minor indisposition. No one need know the truth." And so Evangeline had settled into life at Hartley Manor. The first weeks had been a kind of convalescence, though not from physical illness. She had spent her days in simple pursuits, helping her mother in the garden, walking in the countryside, reading in the library, playing the pianoforte without worrying whether anyone heard or cared. She had helped Anne with wedding preparations, offering advice on household management, and listening to her sister's excited chatter about her future with Mr. Whitmore, who was clearly devoted to his intended bride. Watching Anne and Mr. Whitmore together had been bittersweet. The young vicar looked at Anne as if she were the sun itself, and Anne bloomed under his regard. They held hands when they thought no one was watching, exchanged meaningful glances across rooms, finished each other's sentences. It was what Evangeline had dreamed her own marriage might become, and seeing it made her heart ache with a mixture of happiness for her sister and grief for her own lost hopes. "You truly love him," Evangeline had observed one afternoon when she and Anne were alone, ostensibly sorting through linens for Anne's trousseau. Anne had coloured prettily. "Is it so obvious?" "Wonderfully so, and he clearly adores you in return." "I'm so fortunate, Evie. I know he is not wealthy or titled, but I do not care. He is kind and good and makes me laugh, and I would rather be a country vicar's wife and happy than a duchess and—" Anne had stopped abruptly, her eyes widening with horror. "Oh, I did not mean— I was not suggesting—" "It is quite all right," Evangeline had assured her, though the words had landed with uncomfortable accuracy. "You are not wrong. Happiness matters more than position. I am glad you have found both love and a good man. Hold on to that, Anne. Cherish it." The weeks had turned into a month, then two. Evangeline had written brief, impersonal letters to Mrs. Hendricks about various household matters, maintaining the fiction that she was merely temporarily away. She had received equally brief responses from the housekeeper, assuring her that all was well at Ashmore Hall, and that His Grace was in good health when he was in residence, which apparently was not often. Henry himself had sent exactly one letter, about 3 weeks after her departure. It had been characteristically brief. "Madam, I trust this letter finds you improved in health. Mrs. Hendricks reports that several matters require your attention regarding the household. When you have recovered sufficiently to return, please send word, so that appropriate arrangements may be made for your journey. I remain, etc. Worthington." Not your husband, not even Henry. Just his title, formal and distant. He had not asked what ailed her, had not expressed concern for her well-being beyond the perfunctory opening line, had not suggested that he missed her presence in any way. The letter had made clear that her absence was noted primarily as an inconvenience to household management. Evangeline had not replied. What would she say? "I am not physically ill, merely exhausted from loving a man who does not see me." Such sentiments could hardly be committed to paper, where servants might read them. As autumn deepened into early winter, Evangeline had begun to achieve a kind of peace. The constant ache of loneliness had eased, replaced by the comfort of being among people who genuinely cared for her. She had helped with Anne's wedding preparations, which took place in late November in the village church. It had been a simple ceremony but filled with joy, and Evangeline had cried happy tears as she watched her sister pledge her life to a man who so obviously treasured her. After the wedding, with Anne departed for her new home in the neighboring county, Evangeline had settled more permanently into life at Hartley Manor. She had begun teaching music to several local children, finding satisfaction in their progress. She had helped her mother with charitable work in the village, visiting the sick and distributing supplies to families in need. She had spent evenings reading aloud to her father, or discussing literature and history with him. It was a quiet life, modest compared to the grandeur of Ashmore Hall, but it was a life where she mattered, where her presence made a difference, where she was seen and valued simply for being herself. She tried not to think too much about Henry or her suspended existence as his wife. Sometimes at night, alone in her childhood bedroom, she would wonder if he ever thought of her, if her absence had made any impression whatsoever on his well-ordered life. Probably not, she concluded. He likely appreciated the reduction in household complexity her departure represented. The thought should have made her angry, but instead she felt only a dull sadness. What a waste it all was. A marriage that could have been a partnership, reduced to a legal formality because one party refused to engage emotionally, and the other had finally exhausted her capacity to keep trying. As winter set in and Christmas approached, Evangeline helped her mother prepare for the holiday. It would be a simple celebration, just the three of them now that Anne had her own household to manage. They decorated with greenery from the estate, and Evangeline made gifts with her own hands, embroidered handkerchiefs for her father, a new collar for her mother's favorite day dress. She tried not to think about Christmas at Ashmore Hall, wondering if Henry would even notice the holiday, or if it would pass unremarked in that great silent house. At Ashmore Hall, Henry Ashmore was discovering that a house could be too quiet. The realization had come gradually, so slowly he had not immediately recognized it. The first week after Evangeline's departure, he had barely registered her absence. He had been occupied with business matters, Parliament was in session, and his days had been full of the usual demands on his time and attention. The second week, he had noticed small inconveniences. Meals were less predictable. Mrs. Hendricks kept asking him what he preferred for dinner, questions that had apparently been directed to the Duchess previously. He had found himself uncertain how to answer. Did he have preferences? Evangeline had always ensured the menus suited his tastes, though he could not recall ever discussing those tastes with her. The third week he had returned to Ashmore from London to find the house subtly different. Nothing dramatic, just small things. The flowers in the entrance hall were wilting, no one having thought to replace them. The music room door stood open, the pianoforte silent and somehow accusatory in its muteness. The gardens visible from his study window looked neglected, though the staff maintained them adequately enough. It was simply that no one was directing the work with Evangeline's passionate attention to detail. He had walked through the rose garden one morning, his boots crunching on the gravel paths. Many of the bushes were being prepared for winter, but he could see that the work lacked the careful touch Evangeline had brought to the space. Roses that she would have wrapped protectively for the cold season were left exposed. Beds that she would have mulched stood bare. Willis, the head gardener, had approached him hesitantly. "Begging your Grace's pardon, but I wondered if you might know when Her Grace plans to return. There are decisions to be made about the spring plantings, and she typically likes to plan the new arrangements herself." "I do not know when the Duchess will return," Henry had replied, hearing the stiffness in his own voice. "Make whatever decisions you deem appropriate." Willis had looked distressed. "The thing is, Your Grace, I don't rightly know what Her Grace would want. She has particular ideas about color combinations and bloom times and such. I'd hate to order plants she wouldn't care for." Henry had realized he had no idea what to tell the man. What were Evangeline's preferences for the gardens she had poured such effort into? He did not know. He had never asked, never paid attention beyond the vaguest awareness that the grounds looked well maintained. "Do your best," he had said finally, inadequately. "I am certain whatever you choose will be satisfactory." But Willis had not looked reassured, and Henry had walked away feeling oddly unsettled. The fourth week, Henry had found himself standing in the breakfast room at an hour when he would normally have been in his study or out riding. The room was empty, the table set for one. How many mornings had Evangeline sat here alone, waiting for him to join her? How many times had he dismissed the opportunity to share her company because he had deemed his own activities more important? He sat in his usual chair and picked up the newspaper a footman had left for him. The eggs and toast arrived, prepared exactly as he liked them. How had the cook known his preferences when he had never communicated them directly? Evangeline, of course. Somehow she had learned what he liked, and had seen to it that he was served accordingly. When had she done that? In those early weeks of their marriage, probably, when she had still been trying to bridge the distance between them, when she had still believed their marriage might become something real. Henry had set down his fork, his appetite suddenly gone. He had sat in that silent room, the newspaper unread before him, and felt something he could not quite name. Discomfort, regret, some combination of emotions he had spent his entire adult life avoiding. The fifth week, he had not been able to sleep. He would lie in his bed, staring at the canopy overhead, and find his mind wandering to Evangeline. Where was she in her parents' house? Was she in her childhood bedroom? Was she sleeping peacefully, relieved to be away from Ashmore and from him? The thought of her relief at his absence had stung more than he cared to admit. He found himself remembering things he had not thought about in years. Their wedding day when she had looked so young and nervous, her hand trembling in his as they made their vows. Their wedding night when he had been so careful to be as quick and efficient as possible, believing he was being considerate by not prolonging her discomfort. Had she wanted something different? Had she hoped for tenderness he had not offered? He remembered her attempts at conversation in those early months, questions and comments he had deflected or ignored because he had seen them as interruptions to more important matters. What had she been trying to say? What had he failed to hear? The realization came to him at 3 in the morning, jarring him fully awake. He knew nothing about his wife. Nothing real. He could not have named her favorite color, her favorite flower, her favorite book. He did not know what made her laugh, what frightened her, what she dreamed about. He had lived with her for 3 years and had learned nothing about who she was as a person. The thought should not have mattered. She was his duchess. She managed his household. She had fulfilled the role he had required of her. What else did he need to know? But it did matter, he realized, with growing unease. It mattered because she was a person, not merely a function. And he had treated her as the latter while entirely ignoring the former. The 6th week, Henry made a mistake that brought everything into sharp focus. He had been reviewing some documents in his study when Mrs. Hendricks had knocked, seeking guidance on some household expenditure. He had approved it absently, then added, "Please have the Duchess review the accounts at her convenience." Mrs. Hendricks had stood very still. "Your Grace, the Duchess is not in residence." "Oh, yes, of course." He had felt heat rise to his face at the slip. "I had forgotten momentarily." After the housekeeper left, Henry had sat motionless at his desk. He had forgotten Evangeline was gone. 6 weeks, and he had so habituated to her invisible presence, managing his household, seeing to his comfort, ensuring everything ran smoothly, that he had expected her to simply materialize when needed. How long had he taken her for granted? How thoroughly had he relegated her to the background of his existence? The 7th week, he began noticing more absences. The drawing room where Evangeline had spent her evenings stood unused, its furniture arranged just as she had left it. A book still open on the side table where she had apparently been reading when she decided to leave. Henry picked up the book, poetry, something by Wordsworth, and found himself wondering if she had enjoyed it. Had she read poetry because it brought her pleasure, or because she had so few other diversions in her isolated existence? The music room was worse. He found himself drawn there repeatedly, standing in the doorway, staring at the silent pianoforte. He remembered now that she had played every day, beautiful melodies that had drifted through the house. When had he last really listened? He had become so accustomed to the background music that he had stopped hearing it, had treated it the same way one might treat birdsong, pleasant but unremarkable. Now the silence was oppressive. On impulse, he opened the pianoforte bench and found stacks of sheet music, some printed, some handwritten. The handwritten pieces were in Evangeline's elegant script. She had apparently been composing, or at least arranging music for herself. He had not known she could do such a thing. Another aspect of his wife he had never bothered to discover. The 8th week brought the first snow, and Henry stood at his study window watching it fall. The gardens were blanketed in white, beautiful but lifeless. Evangeline would have loved this, he thought suddenly. She would have gone walking in it despite the cold, her cheeks flushed pink, her eyes bright with pleasure at the transformation of her beloved grounds. How did he know that? He had never walked in the snow with her, yet somehow he did know it, from some observation he had made and forgotten, some glimpse of her pleasure in simple things that had registered despite his determined obliviousness. The realization that he had noticed her, more than he had consciously acknowledged, was unsettling. Some part of him had been paying attention, even as he convinced himself she required none of his regard. Some part of him had registered her presence, her personality, her essence, and had stored away details he had thought himself too busy to learn. Which meant some part of him had cared, even while the rest of him had been determined not to. The 9th week, Henry caught himself doing something absurd. He was planning what he would say to Evangeline when she returned. He would tell her, what? That he had noticed her absence, that the house felt empty without her, that he had perhaps made errors in judgment regarding their marriage. But she was not returning. The weeks had turned into months, and there had been no word beyond her brief impersonal letters to Mrs. Hendricks. She had not written to him at all since that first week, and his single letter to her had gone unanswered. The possibility that she might not return at all began to take root in his mind. What if she simply stayed in Derbyshire indefinitely? What could he do? Demand she come back? On what grounds? He was her husband, yes, but he had given her so little reason to wish to be his wife that any insistence on her return would be both cruel and absurd. The thought of her never returning caused something uncomfortably like panic to flutter in his chest. The 10th week, Henry stopped eating properly. Food held no appeal. He would sit at that long dining table, too large for one person, absurdly so, and pick at whatever had been prepared, unable to muster any interest in sustenance. His valet began expressing concern about his weight loss. Mrs. Hendricks made pointed comments about how his Grace needed to maintain his strength. He did not care. The 11th week, he began sleeping even less than before, sometimes not at all. He would walk through the house at odd hours, a ghost in his own home, drifting from room to room as if searching for something. He did not know what he was looking for, until one night he found himself standing outside Evangeline's chambers. The door was locked. She had apparently taken that precaution before leaving, but he stood there anyway, his hand resting on the handle, wondering what lay beyond. When had he last crossed that threshold? 2 years ago? 3? After those first awkward months of attempting to fulfill his martial duty, he had stopped visiting her bedroom entirely, and she had certainly never been invited to his. Another failure on his list of many. The 12th week brought Christmas, which Henry ignored entirely. Mrs. Hendricks made some attempts at decorations and special meals, but he waved them away. What was the point? He was alone in this massive house, alone by his own design, by his own determination to keep everyone, especially his wife, at a careful distance. Well, he had succeeded. He was completely, utterly alone. The thought offered no satisfaction whatsoever. The 13th week something broke inside him. He was sitting in his study, attempting to work on correspondence, when he realized he had been staring at the same letter for 20 minutes without comprehending a single word. His eyes would not focus. His hands trembled slightly, from fatigue, he told himself, though he knew it was more than that. He felt ill, not with fever or physical ailment, but with something deeper, a sickness of the soul perhaps, a profound wrongness that emanated from his very core. He missed her. The admission, even unspoken in the privacy of his own mind, was staggering. He missed Evangeline. He missed the sight of her at breakfast, even though he had so rarely joined her. He missed the sound of her music, even though he had never acknowledged how much he enjoyed it. He missed glimpsing her in the gardens, the way she moved among her flowers with such obvious pleasure. He missed her quiet presence in the evenings, knowing she was somewhere in the house, even if he did not seek her out. He missed the woman he had never allowed himself to know, And the loss was devastating, because it was not merely that she was absent from Ashmore, it was that she was absent from his life, and had been, he realized with sickening clarity, from the very beginning. He had married her and then systematically prevented her from being truly present in his existence. He had pushed her away, ignored her, dismissed her, until she had finally done the only rational thing and left. And now he was paying the price for his coldness. Now he was discovering, too late, that he had had something precious and had discarded it through sheer emotional cowardice. The 14th week, Henry began his decline in earnest. The illness he had cultivated through weeks of poor sleep and inadequate nutrition finally took hold. He developed a fever, a cough that would not subside. The physician was summoned and prescribed rest, proper nourishment, and a cessation of worry. But Henry could not rest, could not eat, could not cease worrying, because worry implied caring about the future, and he had discovered too late that his future held no meaning without Evangeline in it. He took to his bed, shivering despite the roaring fire in his chambers. His valet hovered anxiously, bringing broths Henry could not stomach, adjusting blankets Henry threw off in his fevered restlessness. At night, or was it day? Time had become meaningless. Henry dreamed. He dreamed of Evangeline in the rose garden, her hands stained with soil, her face alight with pleasure at coaxing blooms from recalcitrant bushes. In the dream, she turned to him and smiled, and the smile held such warmth that he felt it like physical heat. "Come see," Dream Evangeline said, beckoning him closer. "Look what has grown." But when he tried to approach, his feet would not move. He remained frozen in place, watching her from an unbridgeable distance, while she waited with that patient smile slowly fading into disappointment. "You never come," she said finally, her voice echoing strangely. "I wait and wait, but you never come." He tried to speak, to call out to her, but no sound emerged from his throat. And then she turned away, walking deeper into the garden, disappearing among the roses until he could no longer see her. He woke from such dreams in a cold sweat, calling her name into the darkness. "Evangeline!" His valet would rush in, alarmed. "Your Grace? Are you in pain?" Pain? Yes, he was in pain, but not the kind that physicians could treat with their tinctures and tonics. This was an agony of spirit, of profound regret, of recognition that had come far too late to matter. Other dreams followed. Evangeline at the pianoforte, her fingers dancing over the keys, creating beauty he had heard but never truly listened to. In this dream, he stood in the doorway of the music room, mesmerized by the sight and sound of her. But when the music ended and she looked up, she did not see him. Her gaze passed through him as if he were invisible. He tried to speak. "I am here. Please see me." But she only closed the pianoforte and left the room, walking past him without acknowledgement, and he realized with horror that this was exactly what he had done to her for 3 years. He had looked through her, past her, anywhere but at her. And now, in the dream, he was experiencing the soul-crushing invisibility he had imposed on her. He woke weeping, which shocked his valet nearly speechless. Dukes did not weep. The Duke of Worthington certainly did not weep. Yet here were tears streaming down his fevered face, and he could not seem to stop them. The 15th week brought delirium. Henry could not always distinguish dream from waking. He saw Evangeline everywhere, sitting in the chair by his bedside, but it was only his valet, standing at the window, a trick of the light, lying beside him in the bed, his own fevered imagination. He spoke to her constantly, or thought he did. Apologies tumbling from his cracked lips. Confessions of feelings he had denied even to himself. Desperate pleas for her to return, to give him another chance, to let him prove he could be the husband she deserved. "I was wrong," he heard himself saying, his voice ragged. "So terribly wrong. I thought I was being strong, independent, self-sufficient. I thought needing anyone was weakness. But I was the weak one, Evangeline. Too weak to risk feeling, too cowardly to let you close." Sometimes he was lucid enough to know he was speaking to empty air. Other times he was convinced she was truly there, listening, and he poured out his heart. "I love you," he said, the words foreign on his tongue, but utterly, devastatingly true. "I think I have always loved you, but I was too much of a fool to recognize it. I loved the way you brought life to that cold house, the way you moved through the gardens like they were holy ground, the way you played music as if your soul was speaking through your fingers. I loved your patience with me, even when I gave you no reason for patience. I loved your kindness to the servants, your gentle management, your quiet strength." He laughed bitterly, the sound turning into a coughing fit. "I loved all these things and never told you, never showed you. I let you believe you were nothing to me when you were everything, the foundation of my entire existence, And I never even noticed until the foundation was gone and everything collapsed. His valet would later report to Mrs. Hendricks that His Grace was saying the most extraordinary things in his fever. The housekeeper, who had observed the Duke and Duchess's cold marriage with pity for 3 years, felt tears prick her own eyes. "Perhaps," she said to the valet, "someone should write to Her Grace. She should know that he is gravely ill." "Should I write to her?" the valet asked uncertainly. "No, the Duke has a secretary. Let Mr. Pemberton write. He will know how to phrase the matter appropriately." Mr. Pemberton, when consulted, had his own doubts. "But His Grace has not requested that the Duchess be informed. Would he wish her to be troubled?" Mrs. Hendricks gave him a look of such severity that he stepped back. His Grace, in his right mind, would not wish her troubled. But His Grace is not in his right mind, and has been babbling her name for days. "Trust me, Mr. Pemberton, write to the Duchess. If His Grace perishes without her knowledge, we will all bear that guilt. And if he recovers and is angered that we summoned her, I shall take full responsibility." Thus persuaded, Mr. Pemberton had sat down that very afternoon to compose a letter. He was a man of few words but great precision, and he chose his phrases carefully. "Your Grace, I write to you at the urging of the household staff, though His Grace has not directly requested I do so. The Duke has been gravely unwell these past 2 weeks. The physician is in daily attendance, but His Grace's fever does not abate, and he takes neither food nor rest in sufficient quantity. It is not my place to speculate, but I feel compelled to mention that His Grace speaks your name frequently in his illness. Whether this is merely the ramblings of fever or something more significant, I cannot say. However, the staff believes you should be informed of his condition. Should you wish to return to Ashmore Hall, I shall make all necessary arrangements for your journey. I remain your humble servant, J. Pemberton, Secretary to the Duke of Worthington." The letter was dispatched by special messenger, who was instructed to ride with all possible speed to Derbyshire. Evangeline received the letter 3 days later. She had been helping her mother preserve fruit in the still-room when a servant had brought word that an express had arrived for Her Grace. Express letters were rare and usually indicated urgent news. Evangeline had wiped her hands and taken the sealed paper with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. When she saw it was from Ashmore Hall, her heart had begun to pound. She had broken the seal and read the brief message once, then again, trying to parse its carefully neutral language for actual meaning. Henry was ill, gravely ill. He spoke her name in his fever. Her first instinct, shockingly, was relief that it was not worse, that he was not already dead, that there was still time. Her second instinct was anger. Why should she care if he was ill? He had certainly never shown concern for her well-being beyond the most superficial courtesy. But even as the angry thought formed, she knew it was false. She did care. Despite everything, despite 3 years of loneliness and neglect, despite her justified anger at how he had treated her, she still cared. Perhaps she even loved him still, though that seemed like the worst kind of foolishness. How did one continue to love someone who had shown such consistent indifference? Yet the human heart, Evangeline was learning, did not always follow logic. Her mother found her still standing in the still-room, the letter dangling from her hand, tears streaming down her face. "Evangeline? Dearest, what has happened?" "Henry is ill," she managed to say. "Very ill. They thought I should know." Mrs. Hartley took the letter and read it quickly. Oh, my dear. You must go to him." "Must I?" The words emerged bitter. "He did not send for me. His secretary wrote on the initiative of the servants. Henry himself has apparently said nothing about wanting my presence. He has been calling your name in his fever. The ramblings of illness mean nothing, or they mean everything." Her mother took both her hands, squeezing firmly. "Evangeline, listen to me. I know he has hurt you. I know he has been cold and distant and everything a husband should not be. But he is still your husband, and if he should perish while you remain here nursing your justified grievances, you will regret it for the rest of your life. Will I? Or will I simply be free of a marriage that has brought me nothing but pain?" "You do not mean that." And she did not really. The thought of Henry dying, of never seeing him again, of never having the chance to tell him how deeply he had wounded her, or how despite those wounds she had continued to care, was unbearable. "I am a fool," Evangeline whispered. "I should despise him." "Love and wisdom are rarely companions," her mother said gently. "Go to him, Evangeline. Go because you are the better person. Go because compassion matters more than pride. Go because 30 years from now you do not want to wonder what might have been if you had made a different choice." So Evangeline had gone. The journey back to Ashmore Hall was made in haste, with only Martha accompanying her. They travelled through rain and cold, changing horses frequently, pushing the pace as much as possible. Evangeline spent the long hours in the coach, alternating between worry for Henry's condition and rehearsing what she would say to him if, when, he recovered. Would she berate him for his neglect, demand changes in their marriage, or would she simply care for him in his illness and then make decisions about their future once he was well? She did not know. She knew only that some compulsion greater than her anger was driving her back to the man who had made her so desperately unhappy. They arrived at Ashmore Hall in the late afternoon of the second day of travel. The house looked exactly as she had left it, imposing and cold under grey winter skies. But now, instead of fleeing from it, she was returning. The irony was not lost on her. Mrs. Hendricks met her at the door, her relief palpable. "Oh, Your Grace, thank heavens you have come. His Grace has been so very unwell." "Take me to him," Evangeline said, not bothering with niceties or removing her travelling cloak. She followed the housekeeper up the grand staircase and down the corridor to the ducal chambers, Henry's private rooms, which she had never entered in 3 years of marriage. Mrs. Hendricks opened the door, and Evangeline stepped into the overheated chamber. The smell hit her first: sickness, sweat, the peculiar odor of someone gravely ill. Heavy curtains blocked most of the light, leaving the room in shadowy gloom. A fire roared in the grate, making the air stifling, and in the massive bed, looking shockingly diminished by the grandeur of his surroundings, lay Henry. Evangeline approached slowly, her eyes adjusting to the dimness. When she reached the bedside, she was shocked by what she saw. This man bore little resemblance to the cold, composed duke she had left behind months ago. His face was gaunt, his cheeks hollow, his skin grey. Dark circles shadowed his closed eyes. His breathing was shallow and ragged. As she watched, his head moved restlessly on the pillow, and he mumbled something unintelligible. "How long has he been like this?" she asked Mrs. Hendricks, who had followed her into the room. "The fever took hold nearly 2 weeks ago, Your Grace. He has been insensible for most of the past 5 days. And the physician. He calls daily, but he says there is little to be done beyond keeping His Grace comfortable and hoping the fever breaks. He has prescribed various tonics, but His Grace will not take them when offered." Evangeline removed her gloves and cloak, handing them absently to Martha. She moved closer to the bed and laid her hand on Henry's forehead. The heat radiating from his skin made her gasp. "He is burning up. This room is far too warm. It will only make the fever worse." "The physician said to keep him warm, Your Grace." "Then the physician is an idiot. Open those curtains, bank that fire so it provides heat without overheating the room, and bring me cool water, clean cloths, and whatever tonics have been prescribed." Mrs. Hendricks hurried to obey, clearly relieved to have someone taking charge. Within minutes the room had been transformed. Curtains opened to let in what little winter light remained, the fire reduced to a reasonable level, fresh air allowed to circulate. Evangeline settled into the chair beside the bed and began the work of nursing her husband. She bathed his fever-hot skin with cool water, changed his sweat-soaked nightshirt with Martha's help, coaxed spoonfuls of broth and medicine past his cracked lips when he was lucid enough to swallow. It was exhausting, intimate work. She had never been this close to Henry for any extended period, had never touched him so much or so gently. In illness, he had lost all his defenses, all his cold composure. He was simply a man, vulnerable and suffering, and she found herself overwhelmed with tenderness she had not expected to feel. As she worked, he mumbled and stirred, sometimes calling out. Once, clearly, he said her name. "Evangeline." She froze, the damp cloth in her hand suspended over his forehead. "I am here," she said softly, not knowing if he could hear her in his fevered state. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. "Evangeline?" he repeated, the word a question. "Yes, I am here. You are very ill, Henry, but you will recover. You must rest." "You came," he whispered, and there was such wonder in his voice that her throat tightened. I thought you would not come." "Hush. Do not try to speak. Save your strength." But he was struggling to say something more, his hand lifting weakly from the coverlet, reaching for her. She caught his hand in hers, shocked by how thin it had become, how it trembled in her grasp. "I am sorry," he managed to say, the words slurred by fever and weakness. "So sorry. I was a fool, a coward. Henry, please, you need to rest." "Let me say it," he insisted with surprising intensity. "Have to say it. While I can. I love you. I think I have always loved you, but I was too stupid to know it, too afraid. I love you, Evangeline." The words, so unexpected, struck her like a physical blow. She stared at him, searching his fevered face for truth or delusion. But his eyes, though glassy, held hers with an intensity that seemed to burn brighter than his fever. "You are not yourself," she said unsteadily. "The illness has you confused." "No." He squeezed her hand with what little strength he possessed, finally seeing clearly. "You were there all along, beautiful, kind, patient, and I never saw you, never let myself see you, because seeing meant feeling, and feeling meant risking pain. But not feeling has been worse. So much worse." Tears were sliding down Evangeline's cheeks now. "You are delirious. You do not know what you are saying." "I know." His eyes were sliding closed again, exhaustion overtaking him. "I know I do not deserve forgiveness. No, you should leave me. But please, please stay. Please do not leave again. Cannot live without you. Tried. Cannot do it." His hand went slack in hers as he lapsed back into unconsciousness. Evangeline sat frozen, his words echoing in her mind. Were they true, or merely the product of fever dreams and illness? She did not know. Could not know until he recovered. If he recovered. But she knew one thing with certainty. She would stay. She would stay and nurse him back to health, and then they would see. They would see if the man who emerged from this illness was truly capable of the change his fevered words promised, or if they were merely empty longings that would evaporate with the fever itself. She settled in for the long night ahead, her hand still holding his, her heart full of fear and hope in equal measure. The next days passed in a blur of exhausting routine. Evangeline rarely left Henry's bedside, sleeping only in snatches in the uncomfortable chair, eating the meals Martha forced upon her, devoting all her energy to fighting for her husband's life. Because that was what it had become, a fight. The fever raged, sometimes spiking so high that she feared his brain would boil. She applied cool compresses constantly, changed his bedding multiple times a day, forced fluids past his lips, drop by drop, when he was too insensible to swallow properly. The physician came and went, looking increasingly concerned. "The fever should have broken by now," he said on the 4th day of Evangeline's vigil. "I do not understand what is keeping it elevated." Evangeline thought she understood. Henry's illness was not merely physical. It was a manifestation of the sickness of spirit he had cultivated through months of misery and self-neglect. His body was failing because his will to live had diminished. He had in effect begun dying of loneliness and regret before the fever had even taken hold. "He needs a reason to fight," she said to the physician. "He needs to want to live." The doctor had given her a strange look but said nothing. What could he say? That the best medicine was love. That seemed far outside his medical expertise, so Evangeline provided that reason herself. She talked to Henry constantly, whether he could hear her or not. She told him about the gardens and what needed to be done in the spring. She described the household matters awaiting his attention. She read to him from books in his library, history and philosophy, subjects she guessed he enjoyed, though she had never actually discussed his reading preferences with him. And sometimes late at night when no servants were present, she spoke more personally. "You must recover, Henry," she whispered, her hand clasped around his. "You must get well because we have so much yet unresolved between us. You have said things I need you to explain when you are coherent, and I have things to say to you as well." She found herself recounting stories from their marriage, moments she had thought forgotten or insignificant. "Do you remember the first Christmas after we wed?" she asked his still form. "I had decorated the house with greenery, and I was so proud of how it looked. You walked through on your way to your study, and you paused, just for a moment in the entrance hall. You looked around, and I thought you were going to comment, to notice all the work I had put into making the house festive. But then you simply continued on your way without a word." She laughed softly, sadly. "I cried in my room afterward. Martha thought I was being foolish, weeping over such a small thing. But it was not small, was it? It was one more confirmation that I was invisible to you." She fell silent, then added, "Yet you had paused, I realize that now. You had noticed, even if you did not comment. That was something, I suppose. A small something, but more than nothing." The days blended together. Evangeline lost track of time, measuring hours only by the slight variations in Henry's condition. Was he slightly cooler? Did he rest more peacefully? Or was the fever climbing again, requiring renewed efforts with the cooling cloths? Mrs. Hendricks and Martha tried to convince her to rest properly, to take a real sleep in her own bed, but Evangeline refused. She would not leave him. Some superstitious part of her believed that her presence was the tether keeping him alive, and if she left, even for a few hours he might slip away. On what she later calculated was the 6th day of her vigil, something changed. She had fallen into a light doze in her chair when a sound woke her. She jerked upright, instantly alert, and looked at the bed. Henry's eyes were open, truly open, not the glassy half-awareness of fever. His gaze was fixed on her face with an expression of such intensity that her breath caught. "Evangeline," he said, and his voice, though weak, was clear and rational. "You are really here." "Yes," she managed, hardly daring to believe. "Your fever. Let me check." She pressed her hand to his forehead and nearly sobbed with relief. Still warm but dramatically cooler than it had been. The fever had broken. "How long?" he asked. "How long have I been ill?" "Nearly 3 weeks total. I have been here for 6 days." He closed his eyes briefly, processing this information. When he opened them again, they glistened with moisture. "You came even after everything you came." "I am your wife," she said, which was answer and non-answer in one. "The wife I treated abominably," he whispered. "The wife I drove away through my own cold-hearted foolishness. Yet you came when I was dying. You are not dying, not anymore. The fever has broken. You will recover now." "Will I?" His gaze held hers. "Or have I broken something that cannot be repaired?" Evangeline did not know how to answer that. She stood, putting physical distance between them. "You need rest, real rest, now that the fever has passed. And food, proper food, to restore your strength. I shall have Mrs. Hendricks send up some broth." She made for the door, needing escape from those penetrating eyes, from the vulnerability in his expression, from the confusion of her own roiling emotions. "Evangeline," his voice stopped her at the door. "Please, before you go, I need to know. Did I truly say the things I believe I said, or was it all fever dreams?" She turned back slowly. "What do you believe you said?" "That I love you, that I have been a fool, that I cannot live without you." He watched her face intently. "Did I say those things?" "You did." "And did I mean them, do you think? Or was I merely delirious?" She met his gaze steadily. "That, Your Grace, is what you must determine when you have fully recovered. Fever may loosen one's tongue, but only clarity of mind can confirm truth of heart." And with that she left the room, leaving him to contemplate her words. Henry's recovery, once begun, proceeded steadily. Within a week he was sitting up in bed, taking solid food, regaining some color in his face. Within 2 weeks he was out of bed, though still weak and easily fatigued. Throughout this time, Evangeline remained at Ashmore but carefully maintained distance. She oversaw his care, consulted with the physician, ensured he followed all prescribed treatments, but she did not sit with him for extended periods, did not engage him in personal conversation, did not give him opportunity to expand on those fevered confessions. She needed time to think, to feel, to decide what she wanted from this marriage, and from this man who claimed in his illness to have finally seen her. Henry, for his part, seemed content to allow her this space, though she sometimes caught him watching her with an expression of such longing that it made her chest ache. He was unfailingly courteous, thanked her for her care, made no demands on her time or attention beyond what his recovery required. It was so unlike the old Henry that she hardly knew what to make of it. 3 weeks after his fever broke, Henry was well enough to leave his chambers. Evangeline was in the drawing-room attempting to return to some semblance of normal routine when he appeared in the doorway. He looked thinner than she remembered, his frame diminished by his illness, but he was dressed properly and stood without visible assistance. His grey eyes sought hers across the room. "Might I join you?" he asked, his voice holding a diffidence she had never heard from him before. "It is your house, Your Grace. You need not ask permission to enter any room." "Perhaps not, but I am asking nonetheless." She gestured to a chair near hers, and he crossed the room, lowering himself carefully onto the seat as if still uncertain of his strength. For a moment they sat in silence. Then Henry spoke. "I owe you an apology, many apologies in fact, but I am not certain words exist to adequately express my regret for how I have treated you these past 3 years." Evangeline set aside the embroidery she had been pretending to work on. "An apology is a beginning, I suppose." "Only a beginning, yes, and insufficient even for that." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. "I have spent the weeks of my recovery thinking, examining my behavior, my choices, my wholesale failure as a husband. And what conclusions have you reached? That I have been every kind of fool. That I took a precious gift, your presence, your devotion, your patience, and treated it with incomprehensible disregard. That I was raised by a cold father to believe emotion was weakness, and I embraced that teaching so thoroughly that I nearly destroyed any chance at genuine happiness." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "My father married my mother for her connections and dowry. They lived separate lives, maintained separate chambers, interacted only when social necessity demanded. I observed this as a child and concluded that this was how marriages functioned, that expectations beyond practical partnership were foolish and weak. So you repeated your father's mistakes, Evangeline said quietly. I did, without ever questioning whether there might be another way. I married you believing that providing material comfort and proper respect was sufficient. I thought I was being a good husband by not interfering with your activities or making excessive demands on your time. You did not even speak to me, Henry. For 3 years you barely spoke to me about anything of significance. I know, God help me, I know that now. I was afraid. That surprised her. Afraid? The Duke of Worthington afraid? Terrified, he admitted, of opening myself to anyone, of allowing vulnerability, of caring too much and potentially being hurt. So I maintained my walls, kept myself isolated and safe. And in doing so, I hurt you, the one person who deserved my care and attention most. Evangeline felt tears prickle behind her eyes. I tried so hard, Henry. I tried to bridge the distance between us. I learned your preferences. I managed your household. I made your home beautiful. I waited for you at breakfast. I played music, hoping you might listen. I did everything I could think of to make you see me. And I did see you, he said intently. That is what I have realized. Some part of me was always aware of you, always noticing even when I pretended not to. I knew your music brought life to the house. I knew the gardens transformed under your care. I knew that when I returned from travel, everything ran more smoothly because of your management. I saw all of this. I was grateful for all of this. But I never told you. Never let you know that you mattered. Why? If you noticed, why did you not simply say so? Because saying so would have meant acknowledging I needed you, that I depended on you, that you had become essential to my existence. And I could not allow myself to need anyone. His voice broke slightly. I was taught that need was the ultimate weakness. So instead, you taught me that I was utterly unnecessary to you, that my presence or absence made no difference whatsoever. Henry flinched as if struck. Yes, and I nearly made that terrible lie into truth. Because when you left, Evangeline, everything fell apart. The house became a tomb. The silence was deafening. I could not eat, could not sleep, could not function. Everything that gave my life structure and meaning was gone, and I finally understood that all of it, had been built on the foundation of your presence. He stood, moving closer to where she sat, then kneeling beside her chair so their faces were level. The gesture was so unexpected, so uncharacteristic of the proud man she had married, that she caught her breath. I told you in my fever that I love you, he said, his eyes holding hers with desperate intensity. You questioned whether those words were true or merely delirium. I am here now in full possession of my faculties to tell you that they were absolutely true. I love you, Evangeline. I have loved you far longer than I was willing to admit to myself. And I will spend the rest of my life proving that love to you, if you will give me that chance. Tears were streaming down her face now. How can I trust this? How do I know this is not just fear of being alone speaking? That once you are fully recovered and back to your usual life, you will not simply revert to your old ways? You cannot know, he admitted. I cannot offer proof beyond my words and my commitment to change. But I can tell you this, the man I was before my illness, that cold, isolated, emotionally stunted man, has truly died. I cannot go back to being him even if I wish to. That illness burned away all my defenses, all my pretenses, and what remains is simply a man who loves his wife desperately and wants nothing more than the chance to build a real marriage with her. I do not want grand romantic gestures, Henry, she said through her tears. I want the everyday things, conversations, shared meals, your actual presence, not just your physical proximity. Then you shall have them, all of them, every day for the rest of our lives. He took her hands in his, and she felt the tremor in his grip. Whether from lingering weakness or emotion, she could not tell. I want to know you, he continued. Everything about you. Your favorite color, and I am ashamed that I do not know it. Your favorite flower, though I suspect roses given your devotion to the rose garden. Your dreams, your fears, your opinions on everything from politics to poetry. I want to sit beside you at breakfast and hear about your plans for the day. I want to listen to you play the pianoforte and actually hear the beauty you create. I want to walk through the gardens with you and learn the names of all the plants you have so lovingly tended. It is blue, Evangeline whispered. I beg your pardon? My favorite color, it is blue. The particular shade of blue in the morning sky just after sunrise. A smile broke across Henry's face, the first genuine smile she had ever seen from him. Blue, the color of hope and new beginnings. How perfectly appropriate. Despite herself, Evangeline felt an answering smile tug at her lips. "You are correct about the roses. They are my favorite flower, though I am particularly fond of the old garden varieties, the ones that bloom once in glorious profusion, and then spend the rest of the season preparing for next year's display." "Like a marriage that blooms after patient cultivation," Henry suggested. "Perhaps." They looked at each other for a long moment. Then Evangeline said softly, "I do not know if I can simply forget 3 years of loneliness, Henry. I do not know if I can trust this transformation completely. I am not asking you to forget. I am asking you to let me try to make amends, to give me the opportunity to be the husband I should have been from the beginning." He squeezed her hands gently. "I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I am asking for it nonetheless, or if not forgiveness yet, then at least a chance." Evangeline searched his face, looking for any sign of insincerity or reservation. She saw only naked hope and vulnerability, expressions she never thought to see on the Duke of Worthington's features. "One chance," she said finally. "I will give you one chance, Henry, but I will not return to the way things were. If you revert to your old coldness, I will leave again, and this time I will not return, no matter how ill you become. I understand, and I will not revert. I promise you that. Words are easy, Your Grace. Actions will demonstrate truth. Then I shall demonstrate through action." He brought her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "Starting now, this moment, I will begin showing you what you have always meant to me, and what you will continue to mean for all our days." The transformation of their marriage did not happen overnight. Henry had to learn how to be open, how to share his thoughts and feelings, how to truly see and listen to another person. It was difficult for him, trained as he had been to maintain emotional distance, but he persevered with a determination Evangeline had never witnessed in him before. He began joining her for breakfast each morning. At first the conversations were stilted, awkward. He did not know how to make casual conversation with his wife. But gradually, as days turned to weeks, they found their rhythm. He asked about her plans for the day and actually listened to her answers. She inquired about his business matters, and he found himself explaining, even seeking her opinion on some matters. "What do you think about the proposed enclosure of the West Field?" he asked one morning. "The steward believes it would increase crop yields, but some of the tenant farmers are concerned about losing common grazing rights." Evangeline had set down her teacup, surprised to be consulted. "I think the welfare of the tenants should be the primary consideration. Increased yields mean nothing if families are unable to sustain their livestock. Perhaps there is a compromise, enclosing part of the field while maintaining some common ground." Henry had nodded thoughtfully. "That is wise counsel. I shall propose it to the steward." And he had. That afternoon Evangeline had overheard him speaking with the steward, crediting her with the suggestion and implementing her idea. It was a small thing, but it meant everything. Evidence that he truly valued her thoughts, that she was becoming a genuine partner in the management of their lives. He began spending time in the music room while she played. At first, he would sit quietly, listening, occasionally closing his eyes, as if the music transported him elsewhere. Then he began to comment, to ask questions about the pieces she chose, to request particular compositions. "Would you play that Mozart sonata again?" he asked one afternoon. "The one in C major. I find it brings me peace." She had played it, pleased beyond measure that he not only listened but remembered and had preferences. When she finished, he had applauded softly. "You play beautifully," he said. "I am ashamed that I heard you play for 3 years and never once told you how much pleasure it gave me. I took it for granted, as I took everything about you for granted." "You are telling me now," she replied. "That is what matters." They began walking together in the gardens, even though it was winter and there was little to see beyond skeletal roses and frost-covered paths. Henry asked her about her plans for the spring, listened intently as she described the new varieties she wished to try, the changes she wanted to make to the layout. "I have been thinking," he said during one of these walks, "that perhaps we might expand the rose garden, add another section dedicated to climbers. I noticed you have been training some along the south wall, and they seem to thrive there." Evangeline had stopped walking, staring at him. "You notice that? I notice everything about you now," he said simply. "I am determined never to overlook anything again." The words had settled around her heart like a warm blanket. He was trying so hard, putting genuine effort into learning to be present, to be attentive, to be a true husband. But the physical aspect of their marriage remained unresolved. They still occupied separate chambers. Henry had made no attempt to visit her bed, and Evangeline was not certain how she felt about that. On one hand, she appreciated his restraint, his respect for the distance that still existed between them. On the other hand, she found herself wondering if he still desired her, or if that aspect of their marriage had died permanently during their years of estrangement. The question was answered one evening, about 6 weeks after Henry's recovery. They had been sitting together in the drawing room, she with her embroidery, he with a book, in comfortable silence. When the clock struck 10, Evangeline had set aside her work and risen to retire for the night. "Good night, Henry," she had said, moving toward the door. "Evangeline." His voice had stopped her. When she turned, he was standing, his book abandoned, his expression uncertain in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "I wonder if... that is, I should like to ask, might I escort you to your chambers?" Her heart had begun to pound. Of course. They had climbed the stairs together in silence, Henry's hand at the small of her back, a light touch, easily broken if she wished, but present nonetheless. When they reached her door, he had not immediately left. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "that I am not asking for anything you are not ready to give. I respect that trust must be rebuilt, that intimacy is earned, not demanded. But I also want you to know that I desire you, not merely out of duty or the need for an heir, but because you are beautiful and kind and the most remarkable woman I have ever known." Evangeline had felt heat rise to her cheeks. In 3 years of marriage, Henry had never said anything remotely like this to her. She began, then paused, uncertain how to express the tangle of her feelings. "I appreciate your patience and your honesty." "Take all the time you need," he assured her. "I am not going anywhere. For the first time in my life, I am exactly where I wish to be, here with you." He had lifted her hand to his lips, kissed it with lingering tenderness, then released her and stepped back. "Good night, Evangeline. Sleep well." She had entered her chambers in a daze, her hand tingling where his lips had touched. Martha had helped her prepare for bed, but Evangeline had barely noticed, her mind replaying that conversation, that kiss, the look in Henry's eyes. He desired her, not as a duty but as a woman. The thought was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. The next day their morning routine had continued as usual, but there was a new awareness between them. Evangeline found herself noticing things she had never let herself see before. How Henry's eyes would linger on her face, the slight smile that played at his lips when she spoke, the way he seemed to take genuine pleasure in her company. It was seductive, this attention. After years of invisibility, being seen, truly seen and clearly appreciated, was heady beyond measure. Their conversations grew deeper, more personal. Henry began sharing things about his childhood, his relationship with his cold father, his struggles with expectations placed upon him from birth. "I never learned how to simply be," he confessed one morning over breakfast. "Everything was about duty, appearance, maintaining the dignity of the title. Emotion was self-indulgence. Vulnerability was weakness. I was taught to be a duke before I was taught to be a human being." "That sounds like a very lonely way to grow up," Evangeline said softly. "It was, and I perpetuated that loneliness into my adult life, never questioning whether there might be another way, until you left and the loneliness became unbearable, and I finally understood what I had been doing to myself, and to you." "Do you ever resent me for leaving?" she asked. "For abandoning my duties?" "Resent you? Evangeline, leaving was the sanest thing you could have done. You should have left far sooner than you did. The fact that you endured 3 years of my neglect speaks to your patience and strength, not to any failure on your part." These conversations were healing for both of them. Evangeline began to understand the man behind the cold facade, to see how his upbringing had shaped him, to recognize that his emotional distance had been learned behavior, not inherent cruelty. And Henry began to understand the depth of hurt he had caused, the cumulative impact of 3 years of small dismissals and larger rejections. "I wish I could go back," he said one day as they walked through the winter gardens. "I wish I could start over, do everything differently from the beginning." "We cannot change the past," Evangeline replied. "We can only shape the future." "Then I shall shape a future worthy of you," he promised. "A future where you never doubt your value, never question your importance, never feel invisible again." He was proving true to his word. The household staff had noticed the change and commented on it in whispers. The Duke, who had barely acknowledged his wife's existence, now sought her company constantly. They took meals together, walked together, spent their evenings together. He consulted her on estate matters, valued her opinions, treated her as the partner she should always have been. Mrs. Hendricks had pulled Evangeline aside one day, tears in her eyes. "Oh, Your Grace, I am so happy to see you both together as you should be. I had worried, we all had worried. But seeing you now, seeing him look at you the way he does, it gives this old heart such joy." The staff's approval mattered more than Evangeline had expected. These people had witnessed her loneliness, had pitied her silent suffering, and now they were witnessing her gradual happiness. Their genuine pleasure in the transformation of the ducal marriage felt like a validation of sorts. As winter slowly began yielding to early spring, another change occurred. The physical awareness between Evangeline and Henry, which had been building for weeks, reached a breaking point. It happened on a mild March evening. They had been sitting together in the drawing room, and Henry had been reading aloud from a book of poetry, something he had begun doing at Evangeline's request. His voice was pleasant, deeper than she had realized, and the intimacy of listening to him read love poems was affecting her in ways she had not anticipated. When he finished a particular sonnet about enduring love and looked up to find her watching him, something in his expression shifted. He set the book aside and moved from his chair to sit beside her on the sofa. "Evangeline," he said quietly, "I find I can no longer pretend that I am content with the chaste distance we have been maintaining." Her breath caught. "Henry, let me finish, please." He took her hand, his thumb stroking across her knuckles in a gesture that sent shivers up her arm. "I told you I would be patient, and I have tried to be, but I am discovering that patience has its limits when one is desperately in love with one's own wife." "You are in love with me?" The words emerged as barely more than a whisper, hopelessly, completely, so thoroughly in love that I can think of little else. His grey eyes held hers with an intensity that made her tremble. "But I will not press you. If you need more time, I will wait. If you wish to maintain separate chambers indefinitely, I will accept that. Your comfort and wishes are paramount." Evangeline found herself thinking of all those nights in the early months of their marriage, when Henry had come to her chambers with such cold efficiency, had used her body without tenderness, had left her feeling hollow and used. She thought of the 18 months of complete abandonment that had followed, the message she had received that she was not even desirable enough for him to continue his mechanical visits. This man beside her now bore no resemblance to that cold, distant husband. This man looked at her as if she were precious, spoke to her as if her feelings mattered, touched her hand as if it were a privilege rather than a right. "I am afraid," she admitted quietly. "Of me? Of what I might do? Of being hurt again? Of believing in this change and then discovering it was temporary? Of being vulnerable and then being dismissed?" Henry lifted her hand to his lips, kissed her palm with aching tenderness. "I cannot promise I will never make mistakes. I am still learning how to be the husband you deserve, but I can promise that I will never again dismiss you, never again treat you as invisible, never again take you for granted. You are the center of my existence, Evangeline. Everything else orbits around that truth." She studied his face, searching for any hint of insincerity. She found only earnest devotion and barely restrained longing. "Kiss me," she said suddenly, surprising herself with her boldness. Henry's eyes widened. "Are you certain?" "Kiss me, Henry. Not the perfunctory peck you gave me at our wedding, or the mechanical prelude to duty. Kiss me as if you mean it. Kiss me as if I matter." He needed no further encouragement. He cradled her face in both hands, his touch gentle, reverent, and lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was nothing like anything they had shared before. It was tender but passionate, careful but consuming. His lips moved against hers, with a skill and attention she had never experienced, and when his tongue traced the seam of her lips, requesting entrance, she opened to him without hesitation. The kiss deepened, and Evangeline felt herself melting, her hands coming up to clutch his shoulders, anchoring herself against the dizzying sensations flooding through her. This was what she had imagined a kiss could be, a conversation without words, a joining that spoke of desire and affection in equal measure. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Henry rested his forehead against hers. "My God," he whispered, "why did I wait 3 years to kiss you properly? What kind of fool denies himself such perfection?" Evangeline laughed shakily. "The kind of fool who thought he did not need anyone." "I need you," he said fiercely. "I need you like I need air to breathe. And I want you, Evangeline. I want to show you what intimacy can be when it is based on love rather than duty. But only when you are ready, only when you truly want it too." She thought about that for a moment, assessing her own feelings. Was she ready? The physical desire was certainly present. Her body was responding to his proximity, his touch, his kisses in ways she had never experienced during their previous encounters. But more than that, she felt safe with him now, cherished, seen. "I am ready," she said softly. "I want to know what it is to truly be your wife, not just in name but in every way." The look Henry gave her was incandescent with joy and desire. "Then allow me to court you properly, to woo you as I should have done from the beginning, to show you slowly and with all the tenderness you deserve what it means to be loved. The transformation of their physical relationship was a revelation for both of them. Henry approached intimacy with Evangeline the same way he had begun approaching everything else in their marriage, with attention, care, and genuine interest in her pleasure and comfort. He courted her in ways both grand and small. He brought her flowers from the gardens she had cultivated, not the formal arrangements a servant might prepare, but small, personal bouquets, clearly chosen by his own hand. He wrote her notes expressing his affection, leaving them in places he knew she would find them. He arranged for a new pianoforte to be delivered from London, a superior instrument from the finest maker. "You have given me so much," he said when she protested the extravagance. "Let me give you something in return. I want you to have the best possible instrument for the music that brings you such joy." He continued to spend time with her constantly, walking in the gardens despite the lingering chill of early spring, sitting with her while she played, reading together in the evenings. But now there was an added element of physical affection. He would take her hand as they walked, kiss her fingers, tuck a stray curl behind her ear with a tenderness that made her heart flutter. Their kisses became longer, deeper, more frequent. Evangeline found herself anticipating them, craving them, disappointed on the rare occasions when Henry left for the night without claiming her lips. One evening, perhaps 2 weeks after that first real kiss, Henry had escorted her to her chambers as had become his custom. But this night, when she turned to bid him good night, he did not immediately step back. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. "I will leave whenever you wish, but I should like to spend more time with you." Her heart pounding, Evangeline had opened the door wider in silent invitation. Henry entered her chambers, the first time he had done so in more than 2 years, and looked around as if seeing them for the first time. "It is lovely," he said. "Peaceful. Very much like you." They sat together on the small sofa in her sitting room, and Henry pulled her close, tucking her against his side. It felt strange and wonderful to be held this way, casually but affectionately, with no purpose beyond the pleasure of physical closeness. They talked quietly about inconsequential things, plans for the rose garden, a letter Evangeline had received from her sister Anne, a matter of business Henry was considering. But beneath the ordinary conversation, tension was building. Evangeline was acutely aware of the warmth of Henry's body against hers, the steady beat of his heart under her ear, the way his hand stroked absently up and down her arm. "Evangeline," he said finally, his voice rougher than usual, "I find myself in an agony of wanting you, but I will not rush you. Tell me what you need from me." She tilted her face up to look at him. "I need you to make me forget every cold, mechanical encounter we shared before. I need you to show me that intimacy can be something beautiful." "Oh, my love," he breathed, "I will show you, I promise you that." He kissed her then, deeply, thoroughly, until she was clinging to him, breathless and aching. His hands moved over her back, her sides, always respectful but clearly conveying his desire. When he finally pulled back, they were both flushed and breathing hard. "Not tonight," he said, though it clearly cost him effort to say so. "When we come together, I want you to have no doubts, no reservations. I want you to be absolutely certain." "I am certain now," Evangeline protested. "Then tomorrow night," he said with a smile, "tomorrow night I will come to you, and I will show you what making love truly means. And every night thereafter, if you will have me." He had left her then, aching with anticipation, her body awakened to possibilities she had not imagined existed. True to his word, Henry had returned the next evening, but this time he had come prepared with patience and tenderness, determined to erase all the damage his previous cold encounters had inflicted. He had undressed her slowly, reverently, telling her how beautiful she was, how long he had wanted to see her this way, how precious she was to him. When she had been shy, self-conscious in her nakedness, he had kissed her until the shyness faded into desire. Then he had loved her, truly loved her, with a patience and skill that left her gasping, crying out his name, clutching at him as pleasure unlike anything she had known washed over her in waves. He had been attentive to her responses, asking what she liked, adjusting his touch, his pace, his movements to bring her the greatest pleasure. And when they finally joined together, it was not the mechanical coupling she remembered, but something transcendent. Henry had looked into her eyes as he moved within her, murmuring words of love, of devotion, of how perfect she felt, how long he had wanted her this way. Afterward, he had held her close, stroking her hair, whispering that he loved her, that he would never leave her alone again. And for the first time in their marriage, Henry had fallen asleep in her bed, Evangeline tucked securely against his side. She had lain awake for a while, marveling at the transformation. This was what marriage could be. This was what she had dreamed of. Not merely physical satisfaction, though that had been revelatory, but genuine intimacy. being known and cherished and desired for who she was, not just for the functions she could perform. In the morning she had woken to find Henry already awake, watching her with an expression of such tenderness it made her heart clench. "Good morning, wife," he had said softly, brushing a kiss across her forehead. "Good morning, husband," she had replied, smiling. "I was thinking," he said, "that perhaps we should close your chambers and mine and share the Duchess's suite, or create new chambers for us both, somewhere that is ours together, rather than spaces that symbolize our separation." "I should like that," Evangeline had agreed. From that point forward, their marriage truly began. Not the hollow arrangement they had maintained for 3 years, but a real partnership based on affection, respect, and passion. They moved into newly prepared chambers, rooms they had designed together, with both their preferences considered. They shared a bed every night, falling asleep in each other's arms, waking to gentle caresses and lazy morning conversations. Henry could not seem to get enough of her company. He cancelled trips to London or invited her to accompany him. He rearranged his schedule to ensure they took all meals together. He sought her counsel on matters large and small, genuinely valuing her opinions and implementing her suggestions. The estate flourished under their joint management. Evangeline's attention to the household and gardens combined with Henry's business acumen created a harmonious whole. The servants, happy to work for a couple who were clearly devoted to each other, performed their duties with renewed enthusiasm. As spring progressed into summer, the gardens Evangeline had so lovingly tended burst into magnificent bloom. The rose garden in particular was spectacular, hundreds of bushes displaying flowers in every shade, from purest white to deepest crimson. Henry insisted they host a garden party to showcase her work. "Everyone should see what you have created," he said. "I want the entire county to know what an exceptional wife I have." The party was a tremendous success. Guests wandered through the gardens exclaiming over the beauty, and Henry made certain everyone knew that it was the Duchess who had designed and maintained everything they were admiring. "You must be very proud of your wife's accomplishments," one guest had commented to Henry. "Proud does not begin to cover it," Henry had replied, pulling Evangeline close and pressing a kiss to her temple, heedless of their audience. "I am the most fortunate man in England. It took me far too long to realize it, but now that I have, I intend to make certain she never doubts it again." Later that evening, after all the guests had departed, Henry and Evangeline walked through the gardens together in the soft twilight. The roses perfumed the air and nightingales sang in the trees. "Thank you," Evangeline said softly. "For what?" "For today. For showing everyone that you value me, that you are proud of me. For 3 years, I felt like a shadow in your life. Today you made me feel like the sun itself." Henry stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You are the sun. You always have been. I was simply too blind to see it. Everything good in my life now traces back to you. My happiness, my peace, my very reason for living. You saved me, Evangeline. When I was drowning in my own cold isolation, you reached in and pulled me out, even after I had given you every reason to let me drown." "I could not let you drown," she said simply. "I love you." It was the first time she had said the words. They had hung unspoken between them for weeks, acknowledged by actions, but not voiced. Now they lay in the open, vulnerable and true. "Say it again," Henry whispered, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I love you, Henry, despite everything, despite all the pain, despite every reason not to. I love you." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I love you," he said fiercely against her hair. "I love you more than I thought it possible to love anyone. You are my heart, my soul, my entire world, and I will never stop proving it to you. Every day for the rest of our lives, I will show you how much you mean to me." They stood there in the fragrant darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, while around them the roses bloomed and the nightingales sang. It was a far cry from the cold, silent marriage they had endured for 3 years, and the transformation felt nothing short of miraculous. As summer deepened, bringing long days and warm nights, Evangeline began to notice changes in her body. She tired more easily, found her appetite changed, felt occasional queasiness in the mornings. When she missed her monthly courses for the second time, she called for the physician with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The physician's examination confirmed what she had suspected. She was with child. The news left her stunned and overjoyed in equal measure. After 3 years of emptiness in every sense, her life was now full of love, of partnership, of genuine marriage. And soon there would be a child to complete their family. She had debated how to tell Henry. Should she be practical and direct, or find some romantic way to share the news? In the end, she simply told him that evening as they prepared for bed. "Henry, I have something to tell you." He had looked up from where he was removing his cravat, his expression attentive. "Yes?" "I am with child." For a moment he simply stared at her, as if the words had not registered. Then his face broke into a smile of such pure joy that it brought tears to her eyes. "Truly, you are certain?" "The physician confirmed it this afternoon. I am approximately 2 months along, he believes." Henry closed the distance between them in 3 strides, catching her up in his arms and spinning her around, gently, carefully, as if she were made of spun glass. "A child? We are going to have a child." He set her down and immediately looked worried. "Should I have done that? Did I hurt you? Should you be resting? What did the physician say you should or should not do?" Evangeline laughed at his sudden anxiety. "I am pregnant, not made of porcelain. The physician says I am in excellent health and should simply avoid undue strain. Otherwise I may continue as normal. Still, you must take care. No more working in the gardens on your knees. We shall hire additional gardeners, so you may supervise rather than labor. Henry? And you must rest more. Perhaps a nap each afternoon. And I shall have cook prepare the most nutritious meals possible. Whatever you need, whatever you desire, you have only to ask." She caught his face between her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "What I need is for you not to treat me like an invalid. I am having a baby, which women have been doing since the dawn of time. I will be sensible and careful, but I will not become fragile simply because I am carrying our child." "Our child," Henry repeated wonderingly. "We made a child. Together." "We did indeed." He placed his hand gently on her still flat abdomen, his expression full of awe. "There is a life growing here. A piece of you, and a piece of me, combined into someone entirely new." "Are you happy?" Evangeline asked, though his joy was evident. "Happy? Evangeline, I am overwhelmed, elated, terrified, grateful beyond measure." He knelt before her, pressing his lips to her stomach through the fabric of her dressing gown. Thank you for this gift, for this second chance, for giving me a reason to become a better man." "You became a better man before this child was conceived," she said gently, running her fingers through his hair. "This baby is simply another blessing in a life that has become full of blessings." That night, they lay together in the darkness, Henry's hand resting protectively on her stomach, speaking quietly about the future. "Do you hope for a boy or a girl?" Henry asked. "I do not care, as long as the babe is healthy. Though I confess I sometimes imagine a little girl with your grey eyes, and I imagine a boy with your auburn hair. But truly, boy or girl matters not at all. They will be loved beyond measure. They will be raised differently than you were raised," Evangeline said firmly. "Our child will know affection, will be encouraged to express emotion, will understand that love is strength, not weakness." "Yes," Henry agreed emphatically. "Everything my father did wrong, we will do right. Our child will grow up secure in the knowledge of their parents' love for each other and for them. They will see what a true marriage looks like. Partnership, affection, respect." "They will be terribly spoiled," Evangeline teased. "Absolutely, utterly spoiled with love and attention. I see no problem with this whatsoever." They laughed together in the darkness, imagining their future, and Evangeline marveled at how much had changed. Less than a year ago, she had fled this house in despair, convinced her marriage was a hollow shell that would never contain anything real. Now she lay in her husband's arms, carrying his child, in a marriage that had been reborn into something beautiful. The months of Evangeline's pregnancy passed in contentment. Henry was solicitous without being smothering, excited without being anxious. He attended to her needs, supported her when pregnancy made her uncomfortable, and celebrated each milestone with genuine joy. He had begun speaking to her stomach, telling the child stories, making promises about the life they would share. "Your mother is the most remarkable woman in England," he would say, his lips pressed to her swelling abdomen. "You are fortunate beyond measure to have her. As am I." When Evangeline went into labor on a cold December evening, Henry had been beside himself with worry. He had paced outside the birthing room, driving the midwife and physician to distraction with his anxious inquiries. "Is she well? Is the pain very terrible? Should it be taking this long? Are you certain everything is progressing normally?" Finally, Mrs. Hendricks had taken pity on him. "Your Grace, women have been birthing babies since Eve. The Duchess is strong and healthy. She will come through this perfectly well. Now please sit down before you wear a hole in the carpet." The labor had indeed been long, nearly 20 hours from first pain to final delivery. But when the midwife finally emerged to announce that the Duchess had been safely delivered of a healthy son, Henry had nearly collapsed with relief. "She is well? Truly well?" "Her Grace is tired but in excellent health and spirits. She is asking for you." Henry had entered the birthing room to find Evangeline propped against pillows, looking exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in fine linen. She smiled when she saw him. "Come meet your son." He had approached slowly, reverently, still hardly believing it was real. When he looked down at the tiny face peeking from the blankets, something in his chest cracked open. Love so intense it was almost painful flooding through him. "He is perfect," Henry whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "He has your nose," Evangeline observed with a tired smile. "Poor child. He should have had your features entirely. They are far superior to mine." "I think he is handsome. Would you like to hold him?" Henry had hesitated, suddenly afraid. "I might drop him, or hold him incorrectly. I have never held an infant before." "Neither had I until a few moments ago. We shall learn together. Here, support his head like this." She had transferred the precious bundle into Henry's arms, and he had looked down at his son with an expression of such wonder that Evangeline felt tears spring to her eyes. "Hello, little one," Henry said softly. "I am your father. And I promise you this, I will never be to you what my father was to me. You will know you are loved every single day of your life. You will see your parents' affection for each other and know what marriage should be. You will grow up secure and cherished and free to become whoever you wish to be." The baby had chosen that moment to open his eyes, grey like his father's, and Henry had laughed shakily. "He is looking at me as if he understands, as if he is holding me to that promise." "What shall we name him?" Evangeline asked. They had discussed names during her pregnancy but had not yet decided definitively. Now, looking at their son, Henry said, "Thomas, after your father. He is a good man, your father, kind and devoted to his family. I should like our son to bear his name." Evangeline felt her throat tighten with emotion. "That is perfect. Thomas Henry Ashmore." And so Thomas came into the world, born into a love that had been hard-won, a marriage that had been broken and remade, a family that had found its way through darkness into light. As the months and years passed, the Ashmore family flourished. Thomas grew into a bright, affectionate child, doted upon by both parents but not spoiled into selfishness. He was secure in his parents' love, witnessing daily their devotion to each other and to him. Evangeline and Henry's marriage continued to deepen. They faced challenges, as all couples do, disagreements about household management, about decisions regarding the estate, about how to handle various situations. But they faced them together, communicating openly, respecting each other's perspectives, working toward compromise. Never again did Henry retreat into cold distance. Never again did Evangeline feel invisible or unheard. They had learned, through painful experience, how precious their partnership was, and they guarded it fiercely. On their 7th wedding anniversary, 4 years after Evangeline's return and Henry's illness, they stood together in the rose garden that had become a symbol of their marriage. The roses were in full summer bloom, more beautiful than ever, the result of years of patient cultivation and care. "Do you remember," Evangeline said, "when you told me that these roses were like a marriage that blooms after patient cultivation?" "I do. It seems I was wiser than I knew in that moment. We have had our share of trials, the barren years at the beginning, then the separation, then the slow rebuilding. But we came through it all." Henry pulled her close, resting his chin atop her head. "We did. And I am more in love with you now than I was when I first realized I loved you. Every day you show me new facets of yourself to admire. Every day I find more reasons to be grateful that you gave me a second chance I did not deserve." "You earned it," Evangeline said simply. "Through genuine change, through consistent effort, through love demonstrated in 1,000 small ways every single day. I will continue demonstrating it every day for the rest of my life." They stood there surrounded by the beauty Evangeline had created and Henry had learned to appreciate in the garden that represented everything their marriage had become, carefully tended, patiently nurtured, blooming in glorious profusion. Thomas's voice called from the house, "Mama, Papa, come see what I have drawn." They smiled at each other and turned hand in hand to walk back to the house, back to their son, back to the life they had built together through love and perseverance and the courage to change. Their story had not begun as a romance, it had begun as a cold arrangement, a hollow duty, a mistake of prideful isolation. But it had transformed into something beautiful, proof that love, real love, could bloom even in the most unlikely circumstances. That change was possible. That people who had hurt each other could heal together. That a marriage nearly destroyed could be rebuilt into something stronger than it might have been if it had never been broken. Years later, when Thomas was 10 years old and his younger sister Catherine was 6, A little girl who did indeed have her father's grey eyes. The family gathered in the drawing room one rainy autumn evening. Catherine was curled against her mother's side, while Evangeline read aloud from a novel. Thomas sat on the floor near his father's chair, working on some mathematical problem Henry had set for him. Henry himself sat watching his family with an expression of profound contentment. These moments had become his favorite. No grand events or social obligations, simply his wife and children together in peaceful companionship. The firelight flickered across Evangeline's face as she read, highlighting the silver threads that had begun to appear in her auburn hair. She was 33 now, and to Henry she had never been more beautiful. As if feeling his gaze, Evangeline looked up from her book and smiled at him. One of those private smiles that still made his heart skip after more than a decade of marriage. In that smile was everything they had built together: trust, affection, passion, partnership, love that had been tested and emerged stronger. "Papa," Catherine said, interrupting her mother's reading, "tell us again how you and Mama fell in love." Henry exchanged a look with Evangeline. They had told the children various versions of their courtship over the years, always carefully edited, to present a romantic narrative suitable for young ears. But Catherine, despite her tender years, had an uncanny ability to sense when adults were being less than fully honest. "Well, sweetheart," Henry began carefully, "your mother and I married when she was quite young." "But when did you fall in love?" Catherine persisted. "That is the important part." Thomas looked up from his mathematics, interested now. "Yes, Papa, you always skip over that bit." Henry glanced at Evangeline again, seeking guidance. She set aside her book and said gently, "Sometimes, my darlings, love does not happen all at once. Sometimes it grows slowly, like a garden that must be carefully tended before it blooms." "Your mother is being diplomatic," Henry said, deciding that some honesty was appropriate. "The truth is, I was a very foolish man when I married your mother. I did not know how to show love, or even how to recognize it in myself. For too long I took your mother for granted and treated her with far less care than she deserved." Both children were staring at him now, eyes wide. Evangeline started to speak, perhaps to soften his words, but he shook his head gently. "It is important they understand," he said to her, then turned back to the children. "I hurt your mother's feelings many times through my coldness and inattention. I was so afraid of needing anyone, so determined to be completely independent, that I pushed away the one person who could have brought me true happiness." "What happened?" Thomas asked quietly. "Your mother left," Henry said simply. "She went to stay with your grandparents because I had made her so unhappy that she could no longer bear to remain. And in her absence, I finally understood what I had lost. I became very ill." "Because you missed Mama?" Catherine asked, her small face concerned. "Yes, little one, because I missed her desperately and finally realized that I loved her and had always loved her. And your extraordinary mother, despite having every reason to leave me to my fate, came back to care for me when she learned I was ill." "Mama saved you," Catherine declared with satisfaction. "She did indeed. She saved my life, and more importantly, she gave me a second chance I did not deserve. And from that point forward, I determined that I would spend every day showing her how much she means to me." "That is very romantic, Papa," Catherine sighed happily. Thomas, older and more thoughtful, had a different observation. "So you made mistakes, but you learned from them and changed." "Exactly so. That is the most important lesson I can teach you both. Everyone makes mistakes, but what matters is whether we recognize them, take responsibility for them, and genuinely change. Pride can destroy everything good in one's life. It nearly destroyed mine. But love, real love, gives us the courage to admit when we are wrong and to become better." Evangeline's eyes had grown suspiciously bright. Even after all these years, Henry's openness about his failures and his transformation still moved her deeply. "And you truly love each other now?" Thomas asked. "Not just say the words, but truly feel it." "More than I can express," Henry said, extending his hand toward Evangeline. She rose from her seat and came to stand beside his chair, taking his hand. He pressed a kiss to her knuckles and added, "Your mother is the best thing that ever happened to me. Every good thing in my life traces back to her, including you two remarkable children." "We are very fortunate, you know," Evangeline said to Thomas and Catherine. "Not every marriage has the depth of love and partnership that your father and I share. We worked hard to build this and we treasure it." "When I grow up," Catherine announced, "I shall marry someone who looks at me the way Papa looks at you, Mama." "When you grow up," Henry said firmly, "you shall marry whomever you choose for whatever reasons you choose. But I hope you will marry for love, yes. And I hope you will find someone who treasures you, respects you, and never makes you feel invisible or unimportant. Like you treasure and respect Mama," Catherine concluded with a child's simple logic. Exactly like that. Later that evening, after the children had been put to bed and Henry and Evangeline had retired to their shared chambers, they prepared for bed in comfortable routine. Henry watched Evangeline as she sat at her dressing table, Martha brushing out her hair, something they did every night, this simple ritual that spoke of care and femininity. When Martha finished and departed, Henry came to stand behind Evangeline, meeting her eyes in the mirror. He took the brush and ran it gently through her hair himself, something he had taken to doing occasionally over the years. "You handled Catherine's questions beautifully," Evangeline said. "I was not certain how much honesty was appropriate." "I want them to understand that good marriages require work," Henry replied, continuing the soothing strokes through her hair. "That love is a choice we make every day, not just a feeling that sustains itself without effort. I want them to know that even when things seem broken, they can be repaired if both parties are willing to do the work. You are a good father, Henry, the father you wished your own father had been. I have an exceptional teacher in the art of parenting," he said, setting down the brush and bending to press a kiss to the top of her head. "You, my love, have taught me everything that matters. How to be present, how to be attentive, how to love without reservation." Evangeline turned on the bench to face him, taking his hands. "Do you ever regret those lost years? The 3 years we wasted at the beginning?" Henry considered the question seriously. "I regret the pain I caused you. I regret my blindness and stupidity. But in a strange way, I do not regret the journey itself, because it brought us to where we are now. If our marriage had been easy from the start, would we value it as deeply? Would we have learned the lessons we have learned? Would we appreciate each other as much as we do? So you believe we needed to break in order to become stronger?" "Perhaps not needed precisely, but I think the breaking and remaking forged something more resilient than what might have existed otherwise. We know how easily happiness can be lost through neglect. We never take each other for granted because we remember what it was like to be apart, to be lonely despite being married." Evangeline stood and moved into his embrace, her arms circling his waist, her head resting against his chest where she could hear his heartbeat. "I love you, Henry Ashmore. I love the man you have become, the father you are to our children, the husband you are to me. And I love you, Evangeline Ashmore, with every fiber of my being. You are my heart made manifest, walking outside my body. Everything I am, everything good I have done, flows from you." They stood there holding each other, swaying slightly to music only they could hear. The music of their own contentment, their hard-won happiness, their deep and abiding love. Eventually they moved to their bed, the bed they had shared for more than a decade now, and loved each other with the familiar passion of long marriage. It was different from those early desperate encounters after Henry's recovery, when everything had been new and uncertain. Now there was comfort in their intimacy, knowledge of each other's bodies and preferences, trust that allowed for both tenderness and playfulness. Afterward they lay tangled together, Evangeline's head on Henry's shoulder, his arms secure around her, their legs intertwined. This too had become ritual. The quiet conversation in the darkness before sleep claimed them. "Mrs. Hendricks told me today that young William, the footman, has asked permission to marry Sarah, the upstairs maid," Evangeline said drowsily. "Will you grant it?" "Of course. They are clearly devoted to each other, and both are excellent servants. I thought we might allow them to have the cottage near the south garden. It needs some repairs, but it would make a lovely home for them." "An excellent idea. I shall have the steward see to the repairs immediately. Perhaps we might host a small celebration for them after the wedding. That would be lovely. The staff will appreciate it." "You are beloved by the staff, you know," Henry murmured. "They speak of you with genuine affection, not merely respect. Mrs. Hendricks told me once that you transformed this house from a cold showplace into a true home." "We transformed it," Evangeline corrected. "Together." "Together," Henry agreed, pulling her closer. "Everything worthwhile in my life we have built together." They fell silent, drifting toward sleep, secure in each other's presence and in the life they had created. The years continued to pass, bringing the normal mix of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man, serious and studious, clearly destined to manage the estate responsibly when his time came. Catherine remained spirited and affectionate, beloved by everyone who knew her. 2 more children joined the family, another son, James, and finally a second daughter, little Elizabeth. The house that had once echoed with silence now rang with children's laughter, with music from Evangeline's pianoforte, with the sounds of a family fully and loudly alive. Henry had long since resigned his parliamentary seat, choosing to focus his attention on his estate, his family, and his community. He had discovered that he was far happier managing his lands and spending time with his wife and children than he had ever been pursuing political ambitions in London. Evangeline had expanded her charitable work in the local community, establishing a school for children of tenant farmers and founding a society to provide support for families in need. Henry supported these endeavors enthusiastically, proud of his wife's compassion and capability. They had weathered storms together. A difficult birth with James that had terrified Henry and left Evangeline weak for months. A fever that had struck Catherine when she was 7, during which both parents had kept vigil at her bedside for days. Financial challenges during a particularly bad harvest year. The death of Evangeline's father, which had grieved her deeply. Through all of it, they had remained united, drawing strength from each other, facing every difficulty as partners. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Henry had arranged a celebration. Not a grand ball for society, but an intimate gathering of family and close friends. Anne and her vicar husband had come, now with 5 children of their own. Evangeline's mother, elderly but still sharp-witted, had made the journey. A few neighbouring families with whom the Ashmores had developed genuine friendships were in attendance. At dinner, Thomas, now 17 and nearly finished with his education, had stood to offer a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who have shown us all what marriage should be. They have taught us that love is not merely a feeling, but a choice, renewed daily through word and deed. That partnership means true equality and mutual respect. That family is built not on duty alone, but on affection and devotion. We are all blessed to have them as examples of what is possible when 2 people commit fully to each other." There had been murmurs of agreement around the table, and more than one person had wiped away tears. Henry had stood and walked to where Evangeline sat, offering her his hand. When she took it and stood, he addressed their assembled loved ones. "20 years ago, I married this extraordinary woman," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the room, "and I very nearly destroyed the gift I had been given through my own pride and stupidity. But Evangeline, in her grace and generosity, gave me a second chance. She allowed me to learn how to love, how to be a true husband, how to be a better man. Everything good in my life flows from that second chance she granted me." He turned to face Evangeline directly, still holding her hand. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You taught me that strength lies not in isolation, but in connection. That vulnerability is not weakness but courage. That love is the greatest adventure of all. I love you more today than I did yesterday, and I will love you even more tomorrow. You are quite simply the best thing that ever happened to me." Evangeline was crying openly now, but smiling through her tears. "And you, Henry Ashmore, have proven that people can change, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, that marriages can be reborn into something more beautiful than ever imagined. I love you with all my heart." He kissed her then, heedless of their audience, and the room erupted in applause and good-natured cheering. Later, when the guests had departed and the house had settled into quiet, Henry and Evangeline walked once more through the rose garden, Evangeline's rose garden, though Henry had long since taken to helping her maintain it. The roses, now in their autumn bloom, perfumed the night air. "Do you remember," Henry said, "walking through this garden on the night of that first party we hosted, when I told you that you were the sun?" "I do. It was one of the most romantic things anyone has ever said to me. It was true then, and it is true now. You illuminate everything around you, Evangeline. You brought light into my darkness, warmth into my cold existence, life into what was essentially death. You give me too much credit. You did the work of changing yourself. Only because you inspired me to want to change, only because losing you showed me what my life would be without you in it, empty, meaningless, not worth living." They walked in silence for a while, hand in hand as they had walked countless times over the years. Finally, Evangeline said softly, "I am happy, Henry. Truly, deeply happy. Whatever pain we endured at the beginning has been more than repaid by the joy we have shared since. As am I, happier than I ever imagined possible, happier than I deserve. You deserve happiness. We both do. We fought for it, worked for it, chose it every single day. That is not something to diminish with false modesty." Henry stopped walking and turned to face his wife in the moonlight. She was 40 years old now, lines beginning to show around her eyes and mouth, lines earned through smiles and laughter, through years of genuine joy. Her hair held threads of silver among the auburn. Her figure had changed with 4 pregnancies, but to him she had never been more beautiful. "I wish I could go back," he said quietly, "and tell that foolish young man who married you 20 years ago what he was about to throw away through his coldness. I wish I could shake him and make him see you from the very first day, really see you, the way I see you now." But if you could do that, would we be who we are today? Would we have the depth of understanding we have? The appreciation for what we nearly lost? Perhaps not. But I still regret the pain I caused you. I will always regret that. Then let that regret fuel your continued devotion, Evangeline said practically. Let it remind you, remind us both, to never take each other for granted, to always choose each other, to treasure what we have. Every day, Henry promised. For all the days I have left, I will choose you. I will treasure you. I will love you with everything I am. And I you, my love. And I you. They stood there in the garden they had cultivated together, quite literally and metaphorically, surrounded by beauty they had created through patient care and devotion. Above them, stars wheeled through the infinite sky. Around them, roses bloomed. Before them stretched however many years they would be granted together, and in that moment they were perfectly, completely content. Their story had begun in coldness and ended in warmth. It had started with distance and ended in intimacy. It had transformed from duty to devotion, from arrangement to true partnership, from hollow formality to deep and abiding love. The Duke's pride had indeed made her leave, but his love, finally recognized, finally expressed, finally lived, had brought her back and kept her, not as a captive or obligation, but as a cherished partner in a life fully shared. And that, in the end, was the greatest triumph of all. Not that they had found love, but that they had created it together, forging something beautiful and enduring from the ashes of their nearly destroyed marriage. Years later still, when Henry lay on his deathbed, an old man of 70 having lived a long and fully realized life, Evangeline sat beside him holding his hand, much as she had during his fever so many decades earlier. Their children and grandchildren filled the house, testimony to the love they had shared and the family they had built. "No regrets?" Evangeline asked softly, stroking his thin hand. "Only the years I wasted not loving you properly," Henry managed to say, his voice weak but his mind clear. "But even those taught us to value what we had, so perhaps no regrets after all. We had a good life, Henry, a very good life. The best life, because I shared it with you." He slipped away peacefully shortly after, with Evangeline's hand in his and her voice murmuring words of love in his ear. And though grief came as it must, Evangeline knew that she had been blessed beyond measure. She had loved and been loved. She had been seen, truly seen, by the man she had married. She had built something beautiful with him, a marriage, a family, a life of meaning and devotion. Their story became a legend in the family, passed down through generations. The cold Duke who had nearly lost everything through pride, and the patient Duchess whose love had transformed them both. It was a reminder that change was possible, that love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that marriages could be reborn. And in the rose garden at Ashmore Hall, which Evangeline tended until her own death some years later, the roses continued to bloom year after year, a living testament to what could be created through patience, care, and devotion. Through choosing love every single day, through the courage to be vulnerable, to change, to see and be seen, through the simple, profound truth that real love, the kind that lasts, is always a choice, and the most important choice of all. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe, like, comment, and share our channel. Your support inspires us to keep creating more stories of love, redemption, and breathtaking twists. Help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and together we'll continue sharing tales that warm the heart. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another of our historical stories. Click and let yourself be enchanted by another unforgettable tale. With all our gratitude. The end.